Hagmann and Hagmann Report for today. It is Friday, October 22nd, 2014. I'm Doug Hagmann, the co-host along with my son Joe Hagmann. Together we are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Folks, you're about to hear an incredible 3-hour program this evening. It's going to be fantastic. With us tonight, we've got our very special guest, Mr. Tim Alberino, on this follow-up Friday. And I say follow-up Friday because we're going to be talking about some things, the continuation, a follow-up from the last time Mr. Alberino was on, and it was a fascinating program then. But folks, you're listening to the only show where we look into topics, we delve into topics, into news, into information, and present it to you in 3D. We look well beyond the headlines and the bylines, bring you the news behind the news. For new listeners, and thanks for checking in with us, we broadcast weeknights, 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern Time. We also have the weekend edition, same time period, 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern Time. That's hosted by Sheila Zielinski, the Weekend Warrior. I'll tell you, she does a fantastic job, and God bless her. Our home base on the Internet is now HagmannandHagmann.com. That's HagmannandHagmann.com. Bear with us as we move much of the content back to that site. But what you can find there right now is a lot of information about the previous month's shows, as well as the ability to listen with one click. And it's very simple. Made it very simple. We do still have HomelandSecurityUS.com. However, as I said, we are migrating to HagmannandHagmann.com on a full-time basis. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us, and thank you very much for your belief and your trust in us as we enter this perilous period that we're approaching. It's on the horizon. In fact, it's more than that. I believe it's right here. Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you, and let's rock and roll tonight.
Yeah, glad to be here. And one of the things, with the Whitestone Remnant DVDs now available, and we did receive one, and I was watching Russ Dizdar speak, and what you just mentioned, Dad, he said it really well. When a car drives off a cliff, do you know you're in trouble when you crash or before you hit the ground? And he said, you realize you're in trouble before you hit the ground. And he said humanity has gone off that cliff, and this is the point we're at in the end days.
Interesting analogy. Well, let's with us tonight again is Mr. Timothy Alberino. Mr. Alberino is just a fantastic researcher, investigative researcher, journalist. His home base is SteveQuayle.com, but Genesis 6 Giants, the Alberino analysis via SteveQuayle.com, via Steve's website. We're going to be talking about just a number of different subjects, including his recent excursion, if you will, to Peru, and what's going on there, and some other things, including but not limited to technology, interesting technology. What kind of technology is in use today that perhaps is not so new. Mr. Alberino, welcome to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report.
Hey, I'm excited about being on the broadcast tonight. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for being here on a Friday night, spending your Friday night with us. Our audience, I've got a couple of different emails today. People saw your name and said, "Oh, I remember that program. It was so great. Glad you're having them back on." So. A lot of people excited about you coming back on.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to be here. Like I said, I really love your guys' show, so it's always an honor to converse with you fellas.
And it's an honor to have you with us. And folks, we'll be answering audience questions tonight. We have a new email address for studio show issues, questions for our guests. Anybody who has a question for Tim, please send us an email at studio@HagmannandHagmann.com. You spell out Hagmann and Hagmann. Studio@HagmannandHagmann.com. We'll be taking questions for Tim there via email.
Joe, the best way to do that, I should have told you this earlier, the best way to do that is just go to HagmannandHagmann.com, bookmark the site, and very simply open up the front page, and on the top right it says Contact Us. You click that button and it opens up a web-based web-based contact form. We see that immediately once it's sent. Okay, so if you go to Hagmann and Hagmann.com, click on the Contact Us, fill out that form. All you do is fill out your email address, your name, the subject. Just put question for Mr. Alvarino or question for tonight, whatever, and type your question out in the box and send. That comes to us right away, immediately. Bang, it's right there. So if we have time, certainly we'll ask the question.
All right. Tim, what do you want to start off with tonight? I know you said you want to talk about your trip to Peru. We want to get into Genesis. I'll turn it over to you, and we'll get right into it.
Yeah, I wanted to I got a couple of emails from the first time I was on with Steve, and concerning some of what happened to me in Peru. I made some very cryptic references to my time living in Peru, and I wanted to clarify some things, and then maybe also talk a little bit about my experience to give people some background on who I am. I'm new to the scene, so it will be helpful for people to understand my perspective, my point of view in reference to where I come from. So basically, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of my background here, but I lived in the Amazon basin of Peru in the department of San Martin, which is right on the edge of the Amazon basin. And the Amazon basin obviously refers to the Amazon jungle, the Amazon River. I was not, for most of my time in Peru, I was not actually living on the Amazon River, although I was for some of my time. And I have many interesting stories that don't really have any relevance to anything we're talking about tonight, but many, many interesting things happened during the time that I lived in the Amazon. But basically, I made a cryptic reference to a very particular situation, a very particular event that happened in my life when I was 19 years old, when I was living with some lumberjacks deep in the Amazon, deep into the jungle, north of the city of Iquitos, up the River Masan, which is a tributary to the River Napo. The River Napo is famous for having large communities of headhunters and the guys that shrink the heads, and also a lot of narco trafficking that happens over there. But I wasn't on the Napo. I was on the River Masan, which is a tributary. But that's pretty much uncharted territory up there in the jungle, and I had a very profound experience. I can't go into the details about it. I don't mean to be ambiguous, but I'm basically finishing up a book that deals with what happened in the jungle. And to give you just a snippet, I was led by the Spirit of God to go into the jungle and to seek the Lord and to pray and to fast. And a very, very intense, tangible, interesting encounter ensued, and it's a book I'm writing. I'm finishing the book. It's called The Blue Book. Hopefully, it will be out before long. And again, it entails what happened to me. But basically, the background that I really want to go into tonight is not that. That happened to me when I was 19 years old. After that event, which was a very profound event in my life, which was a life-changing event, I got married to my wife, Jasmine, who is from Cleveland, Ohio, where I was born and bred. I was born and bred in Brook Park, Ohio, a suburb of Cleveland. And my father was a non-denominational pastor, and Jasmine's family went to our church. And so it turned out that we ended up getting married and moving back down to Peru. And we felt like the Lord wanted us to go back down to Peru, and so we went down there and we started a ministry, and we lived together in Peru for the numbers are kind of foggy in my mind at this point, but it was at least 5-6 years. I lived in Peru for somewhere around 10 years in total, so I probably lived about 7 years in Peru with my wife. and we had 2 children in Peru, so they're Peruvian American citizens. And one of the things I wanted to clarify was when I referred to, again, cryptically, the first time I was on the broadcast with you guys about the experience I had in the jungle, I didn't mean to suggest that I was involved in some kind of occultic or demonic situation in terms of I wasn't part of some kind of a secret society or something like that, because I got some emails wondering about that, because I mentioned that I was intimately acquainted with deception, I think is the way I put it. And that's not what I mean. I've never been involved in any kind of a secret society. I've never been involved in any kind of occultic practices. I've never even taken any kind of a narcotic in my life. I've never even smoked marijuana, and I'm not tooting my horn. I'm just stating that as a fact for those who are wondering about my reference to deception and things that happen in the jungle. But anyways, fast forwarding back to being married to my wife Jasmine, living in Peru, we had a ministry in the city of Tarapoto, and we did various things while we were down there. Some of what we did was we worked with what are referred to as global nomadic youth. Not a lot of people know what global nomadic youth are, but basically it's very difficult to describe global nomadic youth. Very difficult. I've tried to do it so many times, and it's near impossible. There's really no reference, really no grid that I can give you to describe who these people are. But basically, I can tell you that they're very hippie-like young people that travel the world. Basically, they throw their lives to the wind and they go wherever the wind takes them, and they travel around, and they're usually young people with lots of piercings and tattoos and dreadlocks, and very, very influenced by the New Age, by the occult, by the mystery religions. Most of them are involved on some level with sorcery, with mediumship, and nearly all of them, if not all of them, are to some level addicted to narcotics. Almost all of them smoke marijuana. And so basically we felt a real burden for these people because they're an international group of young people, and a lot of them would be passing through Peru. So we had a lot of interesting experiences with those young people. We would preach the gospel and minister to them, and we saw a lot of fruit from that, and we learned a lot from that. Lots of demonic, supernatural encounters involving that ministry. But then we sort of morphed that ministry into an intercession ministry. My wife and I had an intercession ministry, and that was really the bulk of what we were doing in Peru when we were living there together. So we had an intercessory ministry and involving some of the different pastors in the city of Tarapoto and some young people. We had a good sized group. In fact, I've never the level of the intensity that existed in those prayer meetings, I've never since experienced it. It was such a dynamic, powerful prayer meeting, and we started off doing it once a week, and then we updated to doing it. We upgraded to doing it once a day. We were doing nightly prayer meetings, usually for a couple of hours, sometimes 3 hours. And we experienced some absolutely amazing things. My background is really with dealing with a lot of supernatural stuff, especially as it pertains to intercession. So we had when we started, we called it the Tarapoto House of Prayer. When we started it, we actually rented out a hostel, and the hostel that we rented out was a particular place. It was a strategic location that was in probably, I would say it was the worst part of the jungle city in which we lived. And it's where all of the shamans and the practitioners of sorcery were coalesced, and that's where they were concentrated. And there was a lot of the famous shamans were there. There's a facility there called Takiwasi. People, The listeners can look it up later. Takiwasi is a institution for drug addicts where they use ayahuasca. And some people might be familiar with ayahuasca. Ayahuasca comes from a vine, a jungle vine, and when the shamans, they prepare it a certain way, and it gives you, basically it makes you high, but it doesn't just make you high. It gives you for many people, a very unique access to the spirit realm. And so it's a very prevalent thing, not just in Peru, but all over the Amazon, Brazil, Bolivia, Ecuador. Ayahuasca is huge, especially when you're in the jungle cities. I mean, not in the jungle villages, for example, down the Amazon River or off of one of the tributaries. Ayahuasca is basically just part of their lifestyle. It's part of their culture. They take ayahuasca, they get visions, they have encounters with all kinds of different entities. Most gringos, when they take ayahuasca, and by the way, gringo just refers to a person of light skin, a European or somebody from North America. When they take ayahuasca, they usually have an adverse effect. It usually has an adverse effect on them in the beginning. They usually puke the brains out, actually. But it's very interesting because ayahuasca, like so many other drugs, is a gateway into, you could call it a forbidden gate, into the spirit realm or into another dimension, or however you want to look at that. But ayahuasca is very interesting because I've talked to many shamans. I've had lots of interaction with the people who make and administer ayahuasca and people who take ayahuasca. I have never taken it, because it's a highly demonic, potent, dangerous, deadly substance. And when I say deadly, not in the sense that you get an overdose and you drop dead, but deadly in the sense that out of all the drugs that I've ever come in contact with through users, dealing with a lot of drug addiction and stuff through the young people that would come through our ministry, ayahuasca was the one drug, was the one narcotic that was, it was almost 100%. It was almost a drug that induced a state of mind or a spiritual state that almost without failure would open a door to demonic possession. In fact, the users of ayahuasca, usually the shamans will have them, they have to eat a special diet before they take ayahuasca, and they have to go into they usually do it at nighttime, and they usually sit in a circle, and there's one or two shamans there who administer the ayahuasca. It's a liquid. They drink this. Is
it opiate based or anything, or I mean?
I don't know. I know that it comes from a vine. I don't know the other ingredients that go into it, but I do know what the vine looks like. I have seen the vine. I have property in Peru, and I have this vine growing on my property just because it grows everywhere naturally. I don't know the other ingredients that are added into it.
All right.
But when the shamans administer ayahuasca, usually the participants are sitting around in a circle, and the shaman's in the middle, sometimes wearing a mask, always has a sort of like a rattle and some other devices in his hand, ceremonial devices, and there's always smoke involved. Smoke is supposed to ward off bad spirits. That's almost universal in all cultures. Sometimes they'll actually just take cigarettes, or what they call mapachos in Peru, and they'll blow the smoke on the head or in the face of the participants to ward off the evil spirits, because in their mind they want to invite, and this is what they actually do, they want to invite the quote unquote good spirits. So really, it's obviously an oxymoron, because they're inviting demonic spirits, and they actually refer to them in many cases as demonic spirits, but they think that there are good demonic spirits and bad demonic spirits, which obviously that's a fallacy, a very dangerous fallacy. And so they begin to do their chanting and do their different incantations, and they actually invite these spirits, and they call these spirits out by name. And the participants have often recounted to me that they would actually see these entities who had various forms and different personalities. They would come and they would manifest in the middle of the circle. And then these entities, some of them were beautiful looking, some of them were ghastly looking, would then slowly make their round around the group of people sitting in the circle and would come up to them one by one and look them in the eyes, one by one, and basically, who knows, look into their soul, look into their consciousness, whatever. And they would select who they wanted to inhabit. And when they came to the person that was desirous, they would inject themselves or infuse themselves into the person, whatever's happening in whatever the physics are of that, I don't know, but they would inject themselves into the person. And obviously,
did you see this? I don't mean to interrupt. But
I've seen stuff I've seen this in other scenarios. I've seen people doing ayahuasca. I've never seen this happen myself during a session of ayahuasca because, frankly, they couldn't do a session of ayahuasca, Doug, Joe, if one of us was standing there. Just the presence of a spirit-filled believer disrupts the whole scenario.
Gotcha. All right.
So basically, and I'll give you an example of that in a moment. But anyways, these entities would go into these people and they would endow them with certain superhuman superhuman capabilities. Some of them would go and take ayahuasca some people go and take it for a very specific purpose. For example, they would go and take ayahuasca because they wanted to be top of their class in college, let's say math class, because it's very competitive in third world countries to get good jobs. So they would go and they would ask the witch doctor or the shaman to help them excel in their math class. Now, the shamans had many different forms of doing this. Sometimes they would they have different things. They have different curses, different blessings, different rituals and rites that they perform. But sometimes it's ayahuasca, and the purpose behind the ayahuasca ceremony would be to call up a certain entity that the shamans were familiar with, and that entity would fuse with the person, and the person basically enters into a pact with that entity. And again, the ratio at which this happens is so high. In other words, the ratio to people who go and do ayahuasca and get infused with demons is very high. That's why I referenced it as a very deadly narcotic, whereas heroin or cocaine may be more destructive to the body, but ayahuasca is certainly one of the most radical or extreme processes of demonization that I've ever seen, that I've ever witnessed and had to deal with. So that's a brief explanation of what ayahuasca does. And the hostel that we rented had, I can't remember, maybe 8 or 10 rooms, and it was always occupied by these nomadic youth, and they were most of the time there to engage in these ayahuasca ceremonies. We had literally right in front of us, I could look out my gate and look right, they had this large hedge, the Takiwasi Center that I referenced earlier. They had a very large hedge around there, which is kind of metaphoric, and I think that that was a very strategic thing by them. They had a very large hedge around their property, and they they fused Catholicism and Takiwasi with spiritualism, theosophy, and shamanism. And it was a very bizarre thing. But I could literally look out from our facility that we were renting, where we were doing the prayer meetings, straight at the Takiwasi facility, where they were being infused with demons on a nightly basis. Actually, they were being infused with demons on a weekly basis. They usually did one ayahuasca session per week. And then down the road from that area, there was a retreat, a shamanic retreat, where many of the most renowned shamans, not only from the Tarapoto, San Martin region, but also from the Amazon region, even coming in from Brazil and other places, the top shamanic people would come, and they would do all kinds of bizarre and very potent incantations and rites and rituals there. So we were literally in the heart of darkness with this intercession ministry that we had, and basically we would do our prayer meetings during the nights, during the evenings. I think it was 7 o'clock for a couple of hours, and so part of the reason why our prayer meetings were so intense was because, like I said, we were in the heart of darkness, and so we had a lot of interaction, a lot of very bizarre demonic interaction down there, because we were really disturbing things. Now let me say that a lot of people want to talk about they want to talk about ancient civilizations. They want to talk about ancient alien kind of stuff. They want to talk about UFOs. They want to talk about the Illuminati. They want to talk about globalism and the one world and the New World Order and the one world government, but they don't want to concede the deep spiritual happenings that are behind all of this. Well, if you take that component out, it's impossible for you to understand what's happening. It's impossible to understand what's happened in the past. It's impossible to understand what's happening now, and it is impossible to understand what's coming in the future, because it's all driven by a supernatural power, and not only supernatural power in terms of, like we talked last time, schematics and actual technology that comes from fallen angels and demonic entities, but also driven by a very powerful, fluid, living, active supernatural power that's literally inhabiting and controlling so many of the people on this planet. And so that's the level of stuff we were dealing with down there in the Takiwasi area where we were living. And to give you an example, our prayer meetings basically would completely, cancel out, annul the ritualistic workings that were happening in the Takiwasi facility. And I didn't even know that we were having that dynamic of an effect on what they were doing in that facility until one day I was approached by somebody. One of the shamanic guys came over, and they were always on the surface friendly to us, but they were our enemies in terms of not they themselves, but the powers that were operating behind them obviously were in conflict with us. So one day he came to the gate. This facility that we were renting had a big pavilion thatched roof hut facility, and it had rooms. It's very difficult to describe, but it was very rustic. And he came over and to the gate, and he was very, very sheepish, but he was trying to be overly kind and friendly. And I knew who he was, and he knew well who I was. And he asked me in the most polite manner imaginable if we would please change the nights that we were doing our prayer meetings, because at that time we were only doing them once a week. I think it was on a Wednesday night. He asked me to please, Wednesday or Thursday, I can't remember. He asked me to please change the night of our prayer meeting. And he was very candid, and he said, because we simply cannot do anything, we cannot accomplish anything when you guys are praying. He said, he literally told me this. He said, it cancels out everything we're doing. It completely disrupts the atmosphere, and the entities are powerless to do whatever it is that they're doing over there. And
Tim,
and that's not, by the way. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask you, with that in mind, wouldn't they think that the power that makes those powers they pray to yield, wouldn't they want to change their worship to a higher power, or the ultimate power, which is the Lord, if they saw that work in their own circles of what they were doing? Wouldn't you think?
No, because then they would have to accept the gospel of Jesus Christ, which they not only do they knowingly deny the gospel of Jesus Christ, but you have to understand that the shamans, their business is the occult. If they were to concede the gospel and convert, then they would be out of a job, literally. And these guys were not only making a lot of money, shamans make a lot of money, but it's not just about money. More than money, they're vying with one another for power. And they kill each other, by the way. Just like the mafia puts out hits on rival factions, the shamans put out hits on rival factions. And let me tell you something, you don't want to have a shamanic hit put out on you. Listen.
It's an Amazonian mafia, Amazonian occult mafia is what you're saying.
Yeah, and to confuse the situation even further, the actual mafia, which operates, people don't know this, but the mafia in South America is very strong. I know people personally who've had their legs broken and were killed by the mafia, and that's a different story. But anyways, the actual mafia employs the shamans to put hits on people. And people do this all the time. By the way, the Catholic Church in Peru, and this may offend some of the Catholic listeners, but this is the facts of life. The Catholic Church in Peru has amalgamated itself, for the most part, with the shamanic culture, to where the curanderos, the shamans, and the priests of the Catholic Church are often the same person. He puts on a robe to go do Mass on Sunday, and on Monday morning he's got his shamanic stuff out, administering ayahuasca. Absolutely. And that makes sense. That makes perfect sense, because the origin is the mystery religions. It's the Babylonian religions. It's the same origin. It's the same entities. It's the same idol worship and basically the same spirits that are operating behind those institutions.
Before you go any further, just for our listeners and for my sake, I had to make sure I knew in which part of the world we were talking. Of course, Peru is in South America. It's on the Pacific side, and it's south of Ecuador, south of Bolivia, or north of Bolivia, south of Colombia, right? And it would be west of Brazil. And where you were at, now correct me if I'm wrong, where you were based at would be midway, probably in the middle of Peru, midway between the Pacific Ocean and Brazil. It kind of the start of, or close to or a little bit into the Amazon forest itself.
Yes, that's an accurate description. We were in what's called the high jungle. There's the high jungle and there's the low jungle. Tarapoto is still part of the high jungle, but it's right on the border of the low jungle. If you get in the car and drive in one direction, you're right in the low jungle, whereas if you get in the car and drive the other direction, you're in the high jungle. And the high jungle is basically the foothills of the Andes, which the Andes get larger as you get further south in Peru. And then that's where the highest peak is, Huaraz. And then if you go further south, then you're in the region towards the Bolivian-Peru border, down there by Lake Titicaca. So, and obviously we've mentioned before, and Steve's mentioned, that Peru is an area of exceptionally high supernatural activity. And not just supernatural activity, but also there are many relics and bones and structures that are left over from, let's just put it this way, non-human races, or races that were not fully human. And obviously people will bring to mind the elongated skulls and the recent discovery of the different tribes from the Atacama Desert, and which, by the way, you can see I've done some analysis on some of those things. But anyways, the area we're in, we live in and lived in, is it is the biggest city. It's the biggest jungle city in the northern part of Peru, because the city of Iquitos, which is a pretty famous place, is more towards the eastern part of Peru, towards the Amazon, but we were in the city of Tarapoto. So anyways, that for people who are looking on maps or pulling Google up right now, that's where we were located, in the city of Tarapoto. That's where this is all occurring, if you wanted the geological reference. So basically, this shaman was asking us to change the days of our prayer meeting. they couldn't change the day, he explained to me, of their activities because it was a very structured situation. Takiwasi is world-renowned, by the way, world-renowned facility. And what they do is they take in drug addicts. It's supposed to be a place where drug addicts can come and can get treatment, and basically they claim that they can break the addiction. But the way that they break the addiction, and this isn't assumption, by the way, this isn't hearsay, this is what they told me. The way that they break the addiction is through ayahuasca, which is supposed to cleanse your body. It's supposed to detoxify your body. But also, they don't tell this to everybody, but because we were already knowledgeable about this, they admitted it to us, they call upon the spirits, these spirits of the jungle, they call them, and these entities come and they empower these people to break the addictions of these other narcotics. So it's a trade-off. They get the addiction of, for example, people who are addicted to have a cocaine addiction. Their addiction to cocaine will be broken by the power of these entities. But as a trade-off, these entities now have legal access and authority in the lives of these people. And in many cases, it results in blatant demon possession. I'm talking about rolling around on the ground, foaming from the mouth, demon possession. And going back to the power of the shamans, especially when they would put a hit out on somebody or when they would curse somebody, this is very, very prevalent in the societies of Africa, of South America, especially the third world societies, where if you don't like somebody in Peru, let's say you live in Peru, in Tarapoto, in the city that I live in, if you don't like somebody in Peru and you really want to get at them, what you do is in many cases, you go to a shaman, and usually they will indicate to you that you need to go and obtain an item of clothing or a fragment of hair or something like that from the person who you want to curse. And you bring that to the shaman, and then the shaman performs a ritual. And basically what the shaman does is he employs entities, demonic entities, to go out and to do things. And part of the whole idea behind the occult, especially witchcraft and sorcery and necromancy, is to control evil spirits. That's what they are really looking to do, is to control these spirits. That's how they heal. That's how they divine certain things. That's how they have knowledge. That's how they have special knowledge about certain circumstances and people. It's because, just like in the Bible, and I believe it's in the Book of Acts, that girl that had a spirit of Pythos, she had a divining spirit that the apostles casted out of her, and she was able to make idols talk. And when they casted it out of her, the spirit, her powers, her special capabilities were rendered ineffective because that entity was gone. That entity had to leave her. It left. So that's what these shamans, and that's what the occultic societies in general, especially the ones that are focused on what they call magica, which is very real, trying to control demons. That's what Aleister Crowley was very interested in, to harness the power and control over these entities. And by the way, there are very strange. There are ways. It's like there's an occultic physics that exists. There are ways in which you can control these entities, but suffice it to say, it's very dangerous, because if you perform these things, and I'm not saying this from experience, I'm saying this from having interviewed and had lots of interaction with people who were into the occult, shamans. If you do these rituals wrong, you can literally unleash hell in the cities or the environments in which you're performing these rituals. And I'm saying that just to convince any listeners that might be skeptical or rolling their eyes about all this spiritual stuff. It's real. And it's real to a very scary level, believe me. And to give you an example, I have a friend in Tarapoto. He's a pastor of a church down there. He's an American. He's from Akron originally. Good friend of mine named Benny Humphreys. He has a church and a very powerful deliverance ministry in South America, in Tarapoto. And Benny, one day I went with Benny to visit this woman who went to visit a shaman. So she had gone and made a visit to a shaman for some reason or another. I can't remember what it was for. It's not always to curse somebody. Sometimes you go because, you know, lots of the people, rather than going to a doctor, they go to the shamans just to cure whatever ailment they have in their body. And she went, and what happened was, rather than getting the cure that she was looking for or whatever the desired result was of her visit to the shaman, all of the bones in her body fused together. All of them fused together. That means all of the moving joints of her body fused together immediately after the visit to the shaman. And we went and visited this woman. They asked Pastor Benny to come and pray for her, and he took me along with him. And it was a very sad sight. This woman was in a tremendous amount of agony and pain and torment. In fact, looking down at her, I got the impression that this was a very conscious soul trapped into this prison now, because she could not move any of her bones. I'm talking fingers, toes. They all were fused together. That is the power of what I'm talking about. It's very, very real, especially in these third world countries. And the activity is commonplace. That's why the shamans are so feared and respected, because they can really mess you up. And obviously, I'm not referring to somebody who walks in the anointing and power of the Holy Spirit, because, getting back to my original story, these guys couldn't even operate when we were praying, not just myself and my wife, but the group of believers that would get together, and we would play music, and we would do worship, and we would pray. And it would absolutely cancel out the demonic activity next door at Takiwasi. And so the shamans were infuriated with us behind the scenes, infuriated with us. In fact, what happened was they couldn't directly harm us. We had a hedge of protection around us, and that's why I referenced how it was very metaphoric for them to have the Takiwasi, that facility, to have that very large hedge. They had a physical hedge around their property that, you know, couldn't stop, obviously, us from being able to indirectly infiltrate and disrupt what was going on there. And that wasn't our intention, by the way. We were just praying in general and worshiping the Lord, and it would disrupt what they were doing. But we didn't have a large hedge around our property, an actual hedge, but we had a supernatural hedge of protection around our facility where we were ministering and praying, that they could not penetrate. By the way, these shamans can astral project out of their bodies, and they do so very often. And when I say astral project, it means some part of their being, whether you want to say the spirit of the soul, whatever the physics are, leaves their body, but their bodies are, let's say, lying in bed, and their bodies are there to whereas if you were to walk into the room, you'd see their body lying there, but they would be in a comatose state. They wouldn't respond to you. They're there, but they're not there. Their body, the shell of their person is there, but the being, the essence of their person, their consciousness is not in their body. It's off somewhere else. And the great fear of these astral projectors, which the shamans were definitely could do, and this was told to me by a shaman, was that they would not be able to get back into their body, because sometimes that actually happens, that if something should happen to their physical body, I don't know exactly what happens to their spirit or their consciousness when it's outside their body, if their physical body is, let's say, killed. But whatever it is, believe me, they were absolutely terrified of it. They were terrified. This was something that it was just the absolute worst scenario, was to astral project out of your body and not be able to get back in. And the way that it was explained to me was because your free game for whatever spiritual entity is out there. You're completely exposed. And this brings me to a point that Pember makes, George H. Pember makes in his book, Earth's Earliest Ages, which Steve and I were talking about a couple of shows ago, that Pember talks about how, and this was so insightful of George Pember. I mean, it floored me because it was a divine revelation from God to Pember that our bodies, our physical bodies, actually act, and this is what Pember, I'm paraphrasing what Pember says in the book, actually acts as an inhibitor, as a defense mechanism for the human race against being controlled to a larger degree by the supernatural world. And when I say the supernatural world, of course, I'm referring to the demonic realm. So there's something about the human body that by the grace of God, there are dynamics at work in our body that turn off sensory capacities or something to that other dimension that we can't handle in our fallen state. In our fallen state, because of sin and death and the separation from God through sin and death, and the whole scenario in the Garden of Eden, we can no longer handle the full capacity and function of what it is to be a human being. So one of the prime objectives of the occult is to reconnect, is to relearn, is to reestablish that access, to regain access to those capabilities and to those faculties, which they do. And because they do it, the only way that they can do it, by the way, is through the help of these entities, these demonic entities. And so once they gain that access, they become basically property of those entities which give them that knowledge. And so that's part of the reason why these occultic societies, that's part of the prime objective that goes on in sorcery, even low level Satanism, is to access as Helena Blavatsky puts it, to access the capabilities, the faculties that are latent in the human race. And it's a very real and a very dangerous thing. So the shamans that were operating around us down there in the Takiwasi area of Tarapoto were very upset with us because I politely told this man who came over, I politely told him that we weren't going to change the days on which we were praying. Because, for one thing, because it was a scheduling issue for us, and for another, I didn't mind at all that what we were doing was interrupting their activities. But I didn't say that to him because I didn't want to engender undue confrontation with the neighborhood. The whole neighborhood was steeped in the shamanic culture and the occult. The whole neighborhood down there, and these guys, these shamans, as a result. And as a reaction to what we were doing, praying, again, we weren't specifically praying against them, but just praying in general and the effect it was having in the neighborhood and in the Takiwasi Center, they began to do their workings against us, their rituals and their let's just call it magic, for lack of a better term right now, against us. And what happened was, after that gentleman came over and asked us to switch the day, and I refused. Again, I refused gently. I refused politely. They began an assault on us. But the assault was it wasn't a direct assault. This is the way it happened. I would come home and go to open my door, for example, to the room that we were living in, one of the rooms in the hostel. Me, my wife Jasmine, and we had our first son, whose name is Arazan. He was a baby at the time. I would go to open the door, but notice that before I went to open the door, there would be very large black tarantulas covering either on the handle of the door or right around the handle of the door.
I'd be out of there. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, these tarantulas would be all over the door, and this was a bizarre phenomenon because although there are lots of tarantulas and all kinds of poisonous snakes and all kinds of insects and reptiles, just because you're in the Amazon basin, it was not common to find these big black tarantulas on my door. In fact, this was the only period of time which I found them particularly on my door. So there they would be, right where I would grab the handle. I would notice the tarantula there and kill it. We were always walking around with machetes, so just knock it off or whatever, and go in the room. But then I would begin to find inside of my room, the room that we were living in. It was a small room, the size of a very small hotel room that we were living in, one of the rooms in the hostel. I would begin to find in that room all kinds of poisonous insects. For example, there's an ant called the bullet ant, which some of the listeners may be familiar with through different Discovery Channel programs that have featured this ant. And this is a very famous ant, number one, because it's really big. I would say the ant is probably 2 inches in length, and it's got, the thing about this ant is it bites you, and the bite is really painful, but it only bites you so that it can swing its abdomen around and sting you. And the sting is poisonous. The sting of the bullet ant can kill a dog, and does oftentimes kill dogs. And it can certainly kill a baby, or at the very least cause a lot of problems for that baby. And I was finding these bullet ants in my bedroom routinely during this period of time, which they were never there before, but all of a sudden I got black tarantulas on my door, and I've got bullet ants in my bedroom. In fact, one time I was laying on the bed, and my son Arzan, who was only 1 at the time, I managed to, I happened to look over, and a bullet ant was crossing over his face, and it didn't sting him, and I just was able to knock it off. Obviously, the Lord was protecting us, and there's some other things, but one of the most amazing things that happened was my wife would be in the habit of getting up in the morning. We had an outdoor there was an outdoor sink and bathroom facilities that was sort of a common area for all the different people living in the hostel who were part of our ministry, and people who we were ministering to would get up and wash their clothes there, and it was a common area. Everybody would use the facility there. And my wife every morning would wake up and she would wash clothes in the concrete sink there. And there was one handle for the sink. There was no hot water, just cold water. There's one handle and then the spigot. And one morning, my wife woke up during this period of time, and she got up early in the morning, and she went to turn on the sink. And this is a concrete sink, a big concrete sink, and the wall it's just a concrete wall behind the sink, and that's where the handle's protruding from in the spigot. So it's just a flat wall. And she went to turn it on, but she noticed that there was a snake curled around the handle in a striking position on the handle, so that if she would have reached her hand to turn the handle, she would have been bit by this snake. And this was a poisonous snake, a very poisonous snake. In fact, most of the snakes in the Amazon are poisonous. It's not like in the United States where the vast majority of snakes here are not poisonous. It's the very opposite in Peru and in the Amazon in general. The vast majority of the snakes in the Amazon are poisonous. So this was a particular snake. This was a particularly poisonous snake, so she could have her hand could have easily been bitten. In fact, that snake was there, curled up in the striking position on the spigot. Now, a couple things about that. Number one, there was no way that snake could have got there on its own, because unless the snake could have extended its body over the gap between the edge of the sink and the wall, which was at least a couple of feet, that would have been difficult. Not many snakes can do that. And the second thing is that spigot's cold, and the snake in the morning is not going to be wrapped around a cold spigot. It's going to be looking for a rock or something to bathe in the sun. So it was put there or sent there, however you want to look at it. And fortunately, I had a guy working for me. His name was Guillermo. He was the groundskeeper in the facility we were renting, and he came over and chopped its head off. I didn't see it. This happened before I got up that morning, and I was just told about it. So this shows you that they I don't know if they were taking these creatures and placing them, or if through some kind of witchcraft they were directing them. I don't know. But I know for a fact it was the shamans. In fact, I was told later that it was the shamans that were doing that. They wanted us dead, but God was obviously protecting us. And so, long story short, before we go to the break here, I'll wrap this up. We had one night in particular that was very bizarre that ended our time down there in this particular area of Tarapoto. There were some individuals who were scoping out our hostel in the evening at nighttime. There was a bridge that crossed the river right next to us, and they were scoping out our position, scoping out our facility, and they had automatic weapons. And they were obviously unsavory individuals. They had automatic weapons and pistols, and they were strategically scoping out our facility because Takiwasi was robbed that very week. It was hit by they call them asaltantes, basically it was an armed assault, and all the personnel were tied up, beat up, and tied up, and all the money was taken from the facility and anything of value. So we were under the threat of assault, and we knew we were under the threat of assault. And obviously we would actively pray against this stuff. And to make a very bizarre, long story short, in a couple minutes before the break here, I had a very strange experience with. I had a Brazilian street fighter who we were ministering to, and this Brazilian street fighter. He made his money by going out and fighting on certain days of the week, prize fighting. And he was very good. He didn't have any cartilage in his nose. He had been broken so many times, but this guy was good. So he came back one day at nighttime during this time when we were under the threat of assault, completely demon-possessed out of his mind and just absolutely going nuts. And he ended up beating up a couple of the young guys that were with us and causing a big problem. And during this time, we were holding a, we were doing night watches. And I'm not referring to prayer vigils. I'm referring to sitting in the common area with weapons. I had a bow and arrow, and we obviously machete and a shotgun, watching to make sure that if somebody tried to break in, we weren't caught unawares because there was this threat of an assault. And so that's what I mean. When I say we were doing night vigils, we were doing night vigils, armed vigils, protecting the facility. And this is when this happened, and this guy walked in demon-possessed. This guy had the strength of, 3 guys. I mean, he was a scrappy guy without being demon-possessed, but he wasn't a real tall guy. He was just an average-sized Brazilian guy. But infused with these demons, this guy was a force to be reckoned with. It was very difficult to restrain him, and I'm a pretty big guy. And I had to basically restrain him, and there was all kinds of bizarre stuff going on. And I had to basically restrain him and kick open the door to the room that he was staying in and throw him in there. And there was so much going on. I can't go into all of it, but there was so much bizarre stuff going on all around me. People were fighting, and they were screaming, and there was all kinds of stuff. And I had to deal with it. And so I threw him in the room, and he's going nuts and all demonic, and a very grotesque, deep voice was coming out of him, and it was obviously completely demonic. His eyes were rolling back into his head, and I didn't know what to do. So what I did was I said this. I said, Lord, I don't know why I said this. I just did. I said, Lord, put this guy to sleep. I said it. And he hit the ground and fell asleep. And
2014. Our guest, Timothy Alberino, is with us. He is talking about his time in Peru, the demonic influences that they faced and spirits that they faced when praying there, when carrying out missionary work there, and some very interesting stories. We have W on the line, and Tim, if it's all right with you, we're going to bring W on to make a quick comment, adding to what you were talking about, using the influence of drugs to conjure spirits and things of that nature. W, you're on. What's going on?
Yeah, with Tim.
Hey, I just wanted to add one quick thing. The active ingredient is dimethyltryptamine and DMT. I had a good friend who is a name that everyone would probably be familiar with as a researcher and somebody who, a scientist that's very well known. He had been studying DMT and had done so in a couple of different places in South America. And one of the things that he related that I think just goes right to the core of this whole story, and by the way that it works is it essentially dampens that part of your consciousness, sort of like alcohol knocks your inhibitions out in your brain and makes you susceptible or allows you to do things you wouldn't otherwise do. The DMT areas of your brain that have to do with personality, where you would express your personality, it dampens who you are, if you will. And so he related, in the course of his study, he had decided that he was going to go ahead and take some of this, which the body actually makes a very minuscule amount of DMT by itself. But this is an extremely strong hallucinogen, on the order of LSD, probably actually stronger. And he had taken some, and one of the things that he had noted in the artwork of people who had drawn pictures of things that they had seen while they were under the influence of DMT, he became personally excruciatingly aware of. And that was that everything around him was rising and twisting and moving, and he realized what it was the bodies of snakes and their eyes. And so he could see just endless eyes popping in and out of his sight and realized that it was nothing but snakes. And when you look at the artwork, and Tim, you may have seen this when you were there yourself, the artwork is very, very frequently this same rising tangles of these things. And he said the thing that stuck with him the most was how gripping the eyes were, trying to draw you into them. And certainly from our perspective as Christians, and this is a person who is not a Christian, this actually upset him tremendously and had a tremendous effect on him, because he realized that even before he went under the influence of this, he was looking for other consciousnesses, if you will, some past consciousness that may still be present in that region, and felt that he had found it, and it was tied to these spirit entities that were trying to communicate, and were, in fact, in his opinion, communicating with these shamans. And as a final thing, I will add also, the Amazon basin is very interesting, because from satellites only in the last decade and a half or so, almost 2 decades, it was some work that I was involved in where we were locating structures across Central and South America. And one of the researchers did some fantastic work and showed that the entire Amazon basin is actually, if you look past the vegetation to the actual surface level, the entire Amazon basin is artificially sculpted out, very precise terraces, almost like a Japanese garden, all the way from the upper mountain reaches all the way down to the Atlantic Ocean side. And it's stunning how once you realize what you're looking at some form of ancient culture or civilization that was there that carved all of these steps out as a huge garden. That's why it's so lush even now. So I decided to add that.
Wow.
The DMT is very, and when we came across some of the warriors, Shining Path warriors that were heavily involved in Peru, oftentimes they were giving out DMT, which the process they make it is just it's as gross as it gets. The way that they make it, chewing in their mouths and making this juice, but they would give it to people and literally drive them out of their minds. And oftentimes they'd give it to them and then skin them alive while they were doing it. It just was horrible, horrible stuff. So this is a tough neighborhood. Oh my gosh. So.
Thank you.
Listening, just compelled by all of what you're saying there, Tim. I wanted to add that little bit in there with the dimethyltryptamine. Thanks, guys.
Well, thank you, W. That was very relevant.
Wow. Yeah, thanks, my friend. Talk soon. Tough neighborhood indeed. My goodness.
Yeah, the Shining Path was actually very active in that area. In the area we lived in, obviously, that was in the 80s. But the residues of their movement could still be found. For example, we had one young guy with us. His name was Darwin, and he gave his life to the Lord. And he was a propaganda agent for the Shining Path. He was employed by them to go into the universities and basically propagate communism and violence against the establishment, and that was his role. And he had been with the Shining Path guerrilla soldiers and had seen some of the horrific things that W was alluding to.
Well, Tim, let me ask you this: why would anyone go there? I mean, that sounds like such an ignorant, simple question, but. Why to the location where you were at? In other words, I mean, we see, and this is something that I've seen just here recently doing some research. Let me just step back a second here and make this somewhat coherent. In doing some of the recent research I've been doing, I've been finding that people from the United States, from the UK, they've been going down into South America, in particular Ecuador or Bolivia and Peru, and actually buying property down there. Is there something about this area?
Yes, on the exterior, the jungle towns and the jungle cities of the Amazon basin in Ecuador and Peru and Bolivia. Bolivia is a little bit of an exception because Evo Morales is not very friendly to Americans, their president there. But Peru and Ecuador are. And so it is a very, on the exterior, superficially, it is a very friendly place. It is a touristic place. It's a place where it seems as if the people are very passive. In many cases they are. You don't run into problems unless you start to interfere with the supernatural environment. Once you start to interfere with the supernatural environment, then the enemies start coming out of the woodwork. So if you're just a tourist, or if you're just somebody looking to buy property or to go explore the Amazon, you're not going to see any of this. In fact, most of the people wandering around, let's just say most of the gringos wandering around in the Amazon basin are so oblivious to what's really going on behind the scenes. They will go out and they will go into the jungle. Many of them come to Tarapoto, but especially Iquitos, which I lived in Iquitos for a while too, which is right on the Amazon. Last inhabited city in Peru on the Amazon, the only inhabited city in Peru on the Amazon. And they go there and they They go to these shamanic retreats and they do ayahuasca and they have a great time and they buy their little trinkets on the street and they go to the bars and they go home and completely oblivious to what's really happening they have no discernment of the spiritual dynamic that's happening around them. And they come and they do their little, in most cases, New Age thing in the jungle, and they get infused with entities that they didn't realize, they didn't know what was happening, and they go home and their lives fall apart. And this happens on so many occasions. And people will tell you you have good trips, you have bad trips with all the narcotics. They're all bad trips because it is an illicit, illegal doorway into something that you can't handle. And W was talking about the artwork, and I can affirm that what he's saying is absolutely true because the artwork that he describes is everywhere. That it is the artwork of the jungle, of the Amazon basin. That is the artwork of the Amazon basin, exactly what he described, because the artists, they take ayahuasca and then they paint. And exactly what he said, I can confirm exactly what he said. Many of the paintings, if not most of the paintings, involve snake-like or entail snake-like creatures, entities, interweaving colors, but at the heart of it usually are eyes or a face with eyes. And that's exactly what the prevalent content or subject matter is in the middle of these paintings, is a face, but particularly the eyes. And there's an entity that was a Incan god but was also very famous in the jungle and was worshipped in the jungle. She's called Pachamama, and Pachamama is called the mother of the jungle. And many of these entities, many of these individuals who are taking ayahuasca, who are trying to get some kind of transcendental enlightenment, are purposely looking for Pachamama. And so what you'll have is a lot of these paintings from people who are tripping on ayahuasca. You'll have this female face. And so there are, and these are entities, by the way, which are very, very, very ancient. These are entities that, remember, all of the fallen entities, they hide their identities. They do it purposely. They're always going to hide their identities. The game is deception. Always was, always will be, until Jesus Christ eradicates these entities from the face of the earth. It's deception. Their liege lord is the father of lies. That's his game. That's his primary play, is deception. And so these entities are always masking themselves, always hiding behind these names. And obviously the names change depending on the culture that you're dealing with. But you basically find when you study, you find that the gods, the personalities that all these different indigenous tribes and civilizations are referring to are the same. They're the same. There's a handful. When I say handful, maybe a few hundred or something like that, of entities that are worshipped under different names, different aliases all over the world, including in the smack dab middle of the Amazon jungle where civilization has barely penetrated at all. And you'll find them worshiping the same gods under different names as the Incans or as the Sumerians, or the Aztecs, for example. So these entities are real. I've always wondered, this was something that was always a question in my mind, was why these entities are so prevalent in the wilderness. And the Bible alludes to this, and the Bible makes an allusion to the dry places, that the entities are in that for some reason there's that there's a prevalence of entities in the dry places, and I don't know why they're in the deserts and in the wilderness. All that I can surmise is that they're in conflict with one another to a degree. Remember, they each have domains, and because they're part, let's just say they're part of the dark side, their nature is to be jealous, is to be wrathful, is to be spiteful, and bloodthirsty and power hungry. These are the fruits of the spirits, if you will, of the dark side. And so this is the nature of these beings. In spite of the beautiful semblance that they present to you, their natures are very grotesque and very evil, because they've fallen from the source of all that is good and life and love, which is God the Father. So they've become twisted forms of what they once were, because they weren't created this way. They became this. And so there is naturally conflict, but there's also cohesion. There's conflict among them, but there's cohesion. There is a plan, there is a conspiracy, there is a strategy that the devil is orchestrating from the top of the hierarchy. These entities, this may not be something that many people think about often, but consider this. When we have a violent government, let's take the Nazis, for example. If a violent government comes to power, a very dictatorial government run by a lunatic or a madman or a bloodthirsty nut such as Nero in the days of the Roman Empire, then they control their empire through fear. A malevolent leader will always control his empire with fear. That's why the Shining Path would give people DMT, and when they were tripping, skin them alive, because it's a horrible sight. It sends shockwaves of fear through the populace, and it tells them, you better conform, or this is the kind of thing that we're going to do. Obviously, Iraq is the greatest case in point at this present time. In those bloodthirsty, demonized, subhuman individuals that are over there decapitating 5-year-olds and all that nonsense. So it's fear. It's fear. It's the power of fear. Well, that's the way that the kingdom of darkness, that's the way that the order is maintained in the kingdom of darkness. It's maintained through fear and through terror, because people make the wrong assumption that these entities exist in an ethereal realm where there's nothing tangible, where there's nothing material, where there's nothing physical. That is not true. The realm in which they exist is far more tangible, far more material than the realm in which we exist. You can call it the dimension or what have you. It's far more tangible than our own. And pain exists in that realm on a far more heightened level than it does on ours. Fear exists in that realm in a far more heightened level than it does in ours. And you could flip that coin and, you can talk about the paradise and the kingdom of heaven and the level of joy and peace that exists that we can't even comprehend. So the point is, this is a shadow. The realm in which we live, the dimension in which we exist, is a shadow of greater things. And by using the word greater, I mean on every level. It's far more tangible. And so these entities, again, are not ethereal beings that cannot be hurt or tormented or are unaffected by fear. No, they're dominated by fear. The devil runs a very tight operation controlled with fear. And the hierarchy is a dog-eat-dog sort of hierarchy among these entities. So when you start to break it down, we have a lot of misconceptions about the spirit world, because we call it the spirit world, and we think that it's a complete separate, something that is so separate and distant from our reality that it's this realm in which only ethereal wraith-like things live and move. It couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, our realm is more wraith-like than their realm. And this is obviously borne out in Scripture when the various prophets, and not the least of which the Apostle John, have their revelations of the throne of God, and they struggle to describe what they're seeing, because it's on a level that our human words can't even describe. So that's the realm that these entities are operating in, and it's one side. Our realm, what we're in and what they're in, you can call it dimension, realm, whatever you want, is two different sides of the same coin. We have been disconnected. Again, I refer to Pember. Pember talks about this, and he does a way better job than I could ever do at explaining this stuff. It's in the book, Earth's Earliest Ages, that our realm is not just a shadow of the other dimension, not just pales in comparison with the other dimension, but it's part of the whole. It's a small part of the whole. And what's happened is we've been disconnected. We've been unplugged from the rest of that realm. And so basically, from contact and from interaction with the rest, let's just call it the rest of reality. Obviously, vocabulary, it's hard to formulate vocabulary about things that we know so little. So it's not that our reality is so different. It's that we've been disconnected with the rest of reality because of sin and death. And again, Pember makes the case that that was a move of grace on God's part, and I agree. That is a move of grace. And people say, well, why would that be grace to disconnect us from that realm? Let me tell you something. I don't know anybody that wants to walk around all day seeing demons, seeing principalities, seeing even angels. Even angels. So many people want to see angels and hear audible voices. Let me tell you something. That's not just a walk in the park. You see, you're not prepared for that on any level. We're not used to it. We don't have those. We don't have our sea legs, so to speak, for that realm. Now, that doesn't mean that when we're in the spirit and praying and interceding and walking with God that we don't interact. We do. But see, when we interact, when we're led by the Spirit of God, and the Lord causes things to happen around us, it's not illegal. It is legal. It's authorized. And so when you move in the anointing of the Holy Spirit and it's authorized, then you're protected by God, who's authorizing it, who's the source of it. But when you move in those realms, when it's unauthorized, when it's illicit, when it's illegal, you have no protection except to try and harness the power and try and possess. That's not even the right word. Control. That's the word I'm looking for. Try and control these entities, and you employ these entities to protect you against the other entities. That's exactly that is the absolute absurdity that's happening in the occult world. That's what's happening. These shamans and these occultic people and these witches and warlocks and necromancers and sorcerers, they have to employ certain entities to protect them from the other ones. And that shows you the conflict. It's a very convoluted situation. It's convoluted, it's compartmentalized, and there's so much conflict, but yet it is an ordered chaos. That's the way that I describe it. There is an agenda because some people believe, I know some people who believe that there's no agenda, there's no conspiracy, that the devil and his legions are just out to just wreak havoc wherever they go. Yes, they're doing that. Make no bones about it. However, there is a conspiracy. There is a very well plotted out, a conspiracy that's been in the works for eons. So there is a conspiracy that's been formulated by minds that we can't even comprehend. So there is a conspiracy, but yet at the same time, there is a level of disorder, and the mechanism for control over that realm is raw fear, among many other things. Believe me, the devil castigates those entities that buck against the system, so to speak. He castigates them. And there is a level of fear that's in operation there. But anyways, before I forget, let me finish this story real quick, and then I don't know if there's questions, but going back to the story that I was relating where I asked the Lord to put that guy to sleep and he hit the ground and started snoring, basically there was an assault on us that night. It wasn't the armed guys, but through the course of that bizarre night, a young guy slowly made his way in to our compound because we did have a fence around it, a small fence around the compound. He made his way in during the night, and also another group of individuals who were all completely high out of their minds and ravenous and extremely aggressive because they were smoking pasta basica, or what's it called it's cocaine paste. It's the residue after you make cocaine, and you want to talk about a substance that will destroy you in very short order. It's cocaine paste. Cocaine paste turns people into raving animals. And these guys were all high on cocaine paste, and they were being aggressive and trying to break in, and we had to deal with them. But during the course of the night, somebody had made their way in and was making their way towards the room in which my family was sleeping, and I believe they had a weapon. And it was a very interesting scenario, which I won't go into. But I was alerted. The Spirit actually prompted me and alerted me to the presence. And long story short, we sent him running and messing his pants because we were chasing him with machetes just to put the fear of God in him. But anyways, this guy returned the next morning. Long story short, I can't give you all the details. I woke up the next morning of this very bizarre night, and I didn't tell you everything that happened that night, but I woke up the next morning to find that much of the populace of that neighborhood was literally at my gate with machetes and knives and staves, literally calling for the heads of the young men that were with me and demanding that they be hung immediately and executed, because they have what they call the ronderos, which are the civilian police. And the civilian police in Peru, if they catch you, there's no, innocent until proven guilty. It's lynch mob mentality. Do we all think he's guilty? Yes? Okay, string him up over the bridge. In fact, they had hung some young men from the bridge adjacent to our facility. So they wanted the heads of these guys. They wanted to hang them. And they were literally at my gates with screaming and shouting. And so basically, long story short, the whole thing was stirred up by the shamans. That's my point. But God supernaturally protected us. None of us were harmed. We walked right through the middle of that crowd. And basically, long story short, again, I know I'm saying that a lot because I keep thinking about how many details are involved that I can't disclose right now because we don't have time. But basically, we left that area. We felt like God was telling us it is time to leave this area, that we accomplished whatever it was that we were there to accomplish. So I wanted to wrap that story up so I don't leave people hanging. And by the way, I'm telling everybody this stuff because this is my background. I'm on the show here with Doug and Joe every now and again, and I'm saying this stuff. I'm making these declarations, and people may be wondering, well, who are you to know anything about this or that or the other, particularly about the occult? Well, I have an intimate relationship, intimate knowledge. I've had intimate proximity with the occult and with the powers of darkness and not only that, let me say this, with the power of intercession and the anointing of the Holy Spirit. And I can tell you that the anointing breaks every yoke, and it breaks the yoke to such a degree that the shamans, they stop and are just jaw-dropped and all. And I'm saying that referencing a very specific scenario. And I'll tell this quick little story. We would have these young people come over, and we would minister to them, and we would feed them, and we would basically preach the gospel. These nomadic youth, who again, most of them were involved in sorcery or some level of mediumship, and some level of demonic stuff, and almost all of them always in narcotics. So we'd have them over. We'd build a bonfire over in our yard. This was when we lived somewhere else. This wasn't when we were down near the Takiwasi facility. We were living in a different part of Tarapoto. So they would come over, and we would have these young people over. And I'm going to give you a little bit of insight that the Lord gave me for people, especially for intercessors who are listening to this broadcast. And I'm sure they can already attest to this, many of them, that these young guys came, and they were young guys and gals. They were from all different countries, from Mexico, Argentina, the United States, all over the world, Germany, Holland. They came from everywhere, these nomadic youth, and they were passing through the Amazon basin, doing their shamanic trips, and so they were gathered around our bonfire, and we were feeding them and just conversing with them. And a local shaman, a young guy, came because they invited him. He came to the meeting. It wasn't a meeting. It was just a gathering. He showed up, and he brought his instruments. And this guy is a fantastic musician. I mean, he's a fantastic musician. And he's the up-and-coming shaman of the Tarapoto region. He's studied with all the bigwigs, and he's even been flown all around South America doing shamanic stuff. So he's the up-and-coming shaman in the region. He shows up. He's a nice enough guy, and shows up with his instruments. And one of the guys that was there was also into sorcery. And again, we were ministering to these people, preaching the gospel to these people. We weren't just hanging out with them. And this, but we were hanging out too at the same time. I don't want you to think we were thumping them over the head with Bibles. That was how we were ministering to them, which I think was the model of Christ. And we would sit with them and we would love them and feed them because they hardly had any money, and then we would also preach the gospel. So one of them was a sorcerer, and he got up and started to put incense around the fire. And we were playing music in the background. It was in English, and it happened to be worship music. I was doing that purposely to kind of control the atmosphere. And these guys started to play music, and the shaman started to lead them in music. And quickly, I realized that this thing was getting out of control, and they were starting to do their shamanic ritualistic stuff. One of the girls instantly popped up and started dancing around like a snake. The guy next to me was praying, doing his ritualistic whatever next to me and bowing his head to the ground and whatever, and the shaman was playing the music. Very, very excellent musician. He was actually playing drums with his hands and playing a pan flute that was tied around his neck at the same time. And I didn't know what to do. I froze. I thought, I only have really two options. Either I drive them away and tell them, I'm sorry, you can't do this here, and shut it down, or I do something else. And I didn't know what that something else was yet. And so I'm asking the Lord, what do I do in this scenario? How do I approach this? Do I just shut it down and kick these people out? Because you have to understand, if you're a person who has discernment, which every believer should have a level of discernment, then you instantly begin to feel the dark forces percolating in the atmosphere, and it's very demonic, and it's very, very, very tangible. And this was in my backyard, and it was becoming very, very powerful and tangible. And the Lord told me, because I play drums too, hand drums, and my wife sings, and the Lord told me, you play. And he instantly reminded me of David, when Saul would be overtaken by the fits, because God actually sent an evil spirit that inhabited Saul, or that would come and cause problems, and Saul would throw these fits, and he would even throw spears at David and basically just act like a person who's demon-possessed or demonically charged. And David would come and play his harp and basically neutralize that entity. And so that's the imagery that God gave me in that moment. And so I grabbed my drum and I started to play and pray. And my wife, not necessarily even pray against those spirits, just worship God, and my wife began to sing. And I actually started in playing with the rhythm that they were playing, but very soon, in short order, I was now dominating it, completely took it over, not by force, just naturally, because the Holy Spirit, the presence of God, began to emanate from myself and my wife and overcome that atmosphere as if it was nothing, and absolutely saturated the atmosphere and shut down the shaman within a minute. And he literally just faded out, stopped playing his instruments. Literally his jaw dropped, and he's looking at us. All the people, the snake girl stopped dancing. The guy over here on my right stopped doing his shenanigans. They just stopped, and they were just literally looking at us with jaws dropped. My wife was singing, and I was playing the drum. And when I hit the last note on that drum, they literally all exhaled. And it was just silence. And the one looked up at me and said, "What in the world was that?" And we began then to preach the gospel. So that was the anointing of the Holy Spirit. And, what you were under was another anointing that wasn't of God. And obviously it was a lesson of how, and I say that to encourage people. I'm talking about all these dark things. We talk about the occult. We talk about all this demonic stuff, demon possession, all this ugly stuff. But the Spirit of God is so powerful, it absolutely trumps anything else in existence. So that's why the apostles tell us that the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but powerful in the Spirit for the tearing down of strongholds. And it's true. It's tangible. It's not metaphoric. Again, for anybody rolling their eyes thinking, I wish they were just talking about the Illuminati or Ebola or something else tonight, listen to me. If you don't understand the supernatural element of this stuff, you have nothing. You have an empty shell. You have an empty shell. I don't care what you know or who you know. If you don't know Jesus and you don't understand the dynamics at work, you have nothing. And so just to encourage all the intercessors, I know that there's a lot of intercessors who listen to this program, the anointing and the power of the Holy Spirit absolutely in every case trumps every other power, every other anointing, demonic presence, and it's not a difficult thing. I mean, it's when God shows up, when the Spirit of God shows up, the enemies of God quake. They tremble, period. And so
this is fantastic. Yeah, but I guess whether it's in the Amazonian jungles of Peru or in the urban areas of Chicago, I mean, these things happen. What you're describing, although what you're describing happened in Peru, I take it that there are similar type of, what would you call them? Not events, but similar ceremonial type of activities taking place here in the Western world. Is that right, or is
there absolutely are? It's just over here. In many cases, the people who are engaged in them during the day, during the night, they're dressed in dark robes and with occultic books in their hands, chanting incantations. During the day, they're sitting in cubicles with suits and ties. That's the difference. Over here in the West, it's camouflaged. It's secret. It's the secret societies. It's the occultic movements. It's the satanic covens, because they're not so integrated into the culture. It's becoming so. Understand that that's where this is all going. But at this point in time, they're still not integrated into the culture to such a degree that it's acceptable or even expected. Not yet. It's getting there really, really fast. We're very close to that point right now with all this media and all this ridiculous, all these artists and rap artists and pop artists with all their demonic symbolism and everything in their songs and music videos. But in South America and in Africa, it's just a part of the culture. It is so deeply ingrained in the culture. Everybody goes to the shamans. Listen, I know people who call themselves believers, Christians, that have been in churches all their lives that go and visit the shamans. And, of course, I would dispute the level of their sincerity, but in terms of their devotion to the Lord. But it's just so ingrained in the society down there. And by the way, this is the way it's always been. I mean, all throughout history, especially in the world right after the Great Flood, there was no separation of church and state, so to speak. There was the priesthood, and the priesthood ruled the kings. It was the priests that rule, and to this day it's still the priests that rule. And in many cases, the priests were the kings, or at least in some cases. There's always a priesthood. Why? Because they're always making connection with the entities, with the powers of the air, with the fallen angels. They're deriving power from that realm. They're deriving influence from that realm. They're controlling people from that realm. They're putting curses and hexes on people, and they're opening up gateways, both physical gateways in the forms of stargates and both spiritual gateways in terms of gateways of authority over whole regions. And as we were talking about last time I was on the program, it's human authority. Humans, we're the ones, we make the contact. We make the initial contact. We are the gatekeepers. We hold the key, the human race. And the devil is always in the business of enticing us to open the gates, open the gates, open the gates. You know, it's not open the gates that the King of Glory may come in, which the Bible talks about. It's open the gates that the Prince of Darkness may come in. It's the same idea. We as the human race have been given authority by God over the planet, and we open the gates for demonic influence and control. And by the way, those gates can be closed in some circumstances. In some circumstances they can't, and sometimes God allows these things to come and overwhelm a nation as a form of judgment.
Okay, and if I understand you correctly, I don't want to take you where you don't want to go or take you off of where you're headed. But when you said, about talking about the Illuminati and about a bull and about all of the current events here, if we don't have an understanding of what you're talking about, we don't know diddly. I mean, it's as simple as that. And I feel like, frankly, listening to you, I feel like I'm in one of those classroom chairs, you know, the Joe, you know, I'm talking about the kids' desks with where you put the books underneath, and you're a college professor. Yeah, I feel like I want to make sure I understand what you're saying here. That this, what you're talking about, is really the root of the evil. Like Steve Quill talks about, the root versus the fruit of the evil. This is the root of the evil. I got you. Yep. Okay. Wow.
That's exactly right. And you know, talking about Steve, one of the major awakenings in my life, and I mentioned this when I was on with Steve the other day, was when I began to realize that the incursion of all these bizarre episodes and happenings that had occurred on the earth that I had glanced over and had a very peripheral understanding of, but had never really focused on it, and it hadn't yet factored into my world paradigm, because this kind of stuff is not taught in churches and is not well known. It's taught in the occultic circles. It's what the mystery religions and the mystery teachings are all about, but it's very rarely mentioned in quote-unquote Christian circles. So one of the major awakenings was, I remember I began to, because I lived in Peru, and because there were megaliths, and because there were old-timers, old farmers and stuff who I used to hang out with, and they would tell me stories about these entities that they would encounter in the jungle. And I remember one time a particular man who was the father of a good friend of mine, he's an old-timer and he's a hunter, and he would always go days and days into the jungle and go hunting by himself. He'd tell me all kinds of crazy stories, and they were true, by the way. This guy is not out there tripping on DMT. This guy's out there hunting. You don't go out in the middle of the jungle by yourself and trip on anything, because it's so easy to die, to become lost. You got to have all of your wits about you. And so he would come back with all these weird tales of all kinds of entities and creatures that he would encounter that would approach him, that would talk to him, that he would see. And I remember him telling me about a tribe of giants that he encountered. Now, he didn't encounter them in terms of stumbling into their village, but he would see them furtively moving sometimes in the distance through the jungle. So that really set me on a track, you know, because I'm the kind of guy, stuff like that doesn't just pass through my mind and I go, giants. It literally resonates in me, and I cannot ignore it or push it out of my mind. I have to dive into it. I'm very analytical that way. So obviously I dove into the realm of giants, and I found the authority on giants, Steve Quayle. I found his material. And one of the particular, I remember listening over and over and over while I was still in Peru to some radio broadcasts of Steve, where he would break down some of the intel on the giants and the giants that are in stasis and the underground bases and all this kind of stuff. So fascinating to me. And I was living in a culture where this stuff was still relevant and was still talked about by the people who, you know, by some of the people who are still alive from the past, much as the United States was 100 years ago, when there were still, and there are to this day, but there weren't as many Native American elders that would tell you the stories of the giants and of the different beings and entities that they would encounter walking around within the shores of the United States. So I was fascinated with this issue of giants, and not just of giants, but of all these other entities, non-human entities, because it doesn't really register in our minds. We're not taught. In fact, we're taught not to think this way. We're not taught to imagine the world in which we live, planet Earth, being occupied and inhabited by conscious, sentient, intelligent entities, flesh and blood entities that are not human. We are not taught to think that way. We're not taught to think that way in school, and we're not taught to think that way in church. We're not taught to think that way. That is a bizarre notion to most people, but it is absolutely true. Certainly true of our past, and it's true of our present, although much of these creatures are now under the ground or up in the or up in the atmosphere. So I just dove into the study of giants and of other things. And obviously a turning point in my life was reading and listening to Steve talk about the book Genesis 6 Giants that he wrote some years ago. And I'm not just saying this because it's kind of true. I'm saying this because it's absolutely true. If you want to get like you were talking about, Doug, a lesson, if you want to sit in the chair and learn about the history of giants on the planet Earth, read Genesis 6 Giants. Steve breaks it down. Go ahead.
Yeah. I got to tell you, I've got it on my bookshelf, and I've gone through it. I've read it once, all the way through. The information in there, I've got to tell you, it's difficult for me, okay, from an investigative point of view, to look at this. And he, by the way, he does a fantastic job of laying out all of the evidence, if you will. But I'm thinking, why isn't this more known? I don't even know how else to frame that particular question. Why is it known?
It's intentionally covered up on every level of society, including the religious level. You may find the tales of giants, not only giants, by the way, serpent people. I mean, when I say serpent people, I'm talking about people that were some kind of a hybrid reptilian entity that the Indians still tell tales. And when I say the Indians, I mean the people living on the continent of India still tell tales that of the civilization, the hybrid snake-like civilization that lived under the ground. So in the West, it doesn't even register. It doesn't even register on people's radars, any of this stuff.
Well, yeah. And I just want to say this. For example, being at Whitestone, Joe and I were at Whitestone in Bozeman, and to see Steve Quayle, of course, read Genesis 6 Giants, his book, of course, visiting his website, and of course, Joe and I, and we've had private meetings with Russ Dizdar, who it goes against, for example, spirits in the spiritual realm, and John Kyle, and talking to him, all of these different people, and of course yourself, you're looking at suddenly this mosaic evolve into a coherent picture. And I'm looking at this, and once again, from an investigative point of view, thinking to myself, we've been really lied to, and we're still being lied to. We're not being told the truth about anything. The lie is so big. Is that fair? I mean, is that an accurate assessment of things?
We've been absolutely duped, bamboozled out of the truth. And for a guy like me, I feel like I was made for this reality. I was made to, and I think a lot of us can say this, to integrate far better into the reality of the world rather than into the superficial, what's the word, charade that people call reality.
Yeah, I don't want to dominate the conversation here, but the way I feel in talking with you and others like Steve Quayle, and Joe and I were talking about this right before you came on, it's almost as if here we are in the United States, or if you're listening to this in the United Kingdom, wherever you might be listening to this, anywhere in the West, you're living your life, but what you're living is just you're living on that thin veneer, just that very thin layer of life. There's so much above and so much below and so much around you that you're not told about. Again, is that kind of a good mental picture of what you're talking about here?
That is an excellent way of describing it. We're living on a thin veneer of not only the history, but the actual reality of what's going on this planet. We're living on just a very, very surface level. What we see, what we hear, what we interact with every day is the surface level. It's the foam on top of the ocean, on top of the boundless depths of the ocean. And some of it we're supposed to know. Some of it we're supposed to perceive. Some of it we're absolutely expected to discern. Especially as for those who are listening who are believers in Jesus Christ, discernment isn't something that's some special power. It's something that should be operating innate in every believer. We should be operating in discernment every day of our lives. And these are the things that as much as they want to hide everything, as much as the priests of power who control the educational system and the banking system and history, as much as they want to hide all of this, you can't hide any of this from a truly discerning believer, because God will reveal these things, because it's truth. We as believers, and for those who are maybe irritated that I'm mainly addressing believers tonight, well, that's because this is where reality lies. People who are outside of the knowledge of Jesus Christ really can't even perceive the things that I'm talking about. They may seem crazy or maybe it sounds like superstition, but you can't really perceive it, because it's God who gives you eyes to see and ears to hear, and He turns on those faculties. And of course, I'm not talking about your physical eyes and your physical ears. I'm talking about He brings enlightenment to your spirit, and not the kind of enlightenment that the New Age talks about. He brings the true knowledge and the truth of not only the gospel, but everything. He shows you, he can show you everything, and there are, like I was saying, there are certain things that are not profitable for us to know, certain secrets, certain knowledge that are purposely hidden from us. But then there are other things, the things that I'm talking about tonight, the supernatural stuff, the fact that we're in constant conflict with this unseen realm. That's stuff that we're not only supposed to know, but we were supposed to discern it on such a level that we take action, that we are living in a state of action. We're not spectators, because you can't be a spectator when you wake up to reality. There are a number of different levels which people can wake up. There's and with all due respect to Alex+Jones, there's the Alex+Jones level that people can have an awakening to, and I really respect Alex+Jones, but there's the Alex+Jones level that people have an awakening to the banking system, the Federal Reserve, the IRS, the Rothschilds or Rockefellers, and the global system of dominance, the prison planet that we're all subjected to. That's the very surface level of the surface. People think that that's so deep, and you know that's an awakening that people have, and they think, wow, I can't believe that I didn't know this before, or that this is actually going on. Well, let me tell you something for the person who has not yet given their life to Jesus Christ. Just wait until you give your life to Jesus Christ, and God begins to download what reality really is into your spirit, because you can't access that except by God. He gives His people true knowledge. He wakes His people up, and that's why there's so many believers walking around are asleep, because they're not listening to the Spirit. The Bible says that the Spirit of truth will come, and He will guide you or teach you all things, not just things pertaining to churchly things, but all things. We're supposed to be awake. We're supposed to be alive. We're supposed to be discerning everything, and discerning things on a greater level than any researcher or investigator can without the enlightening power of the Spirit of God.
Well, Mr. Alvarino, I got to tell you this. You might have just set a record for a number of emails. We've got people wanting you on every night for the next week to continue your explanations. It's amazing, because what you're saying, now I'm getting this. Folks, you listen to Paul McGuire, you listen to Nathan Leal, you listen to Steve Quayle and Pastor Langford, and every one of the guests that we have. Look at what Mr. Alvarino is doing, is tying all of this together and saying, wait a second, in order to really gain full understanding, you've got to completely give yourself over to God, and you've got to
have the knowledge
yes.
of the gospel of Jesus Christ. You have to have it.
Wow. Okay, this is perfect. Man, I'll tell you something. This is great. And, again, I didn't mean to monopolize this more as and more after the break, Mr. Alberino, and of course you take us wherever you want to go.
And by the way, let me just say really quickly, I'm not saying that Alex+Jones doesn't have that. I don't want people to think I'm making that statement. I don't know the man personally, and I really respect his work. I'm speaking to something deeper, something spiritual.
Yes, no, and we completely understand. We're on good terms with Alex+Jones. We understand where he's coming from. He has a very particular audience that he speaks to.
Yes,
and
he does a great job.
Yeah, he does. And he works his butt off, and I'll tell you something, he does a lot for the cause. And, of course, we have a particular audience that we speak to. So we're working together. But what you're saying, I fully understand, and Joe's nodding over there in agreement. We fully understand. This is actually beyond the PhD level. This is a dual PhD, if you will, with what Mr. Alberino is saying. The Alberino analysis, a new video out, by the way. We're going to be posting on our site, Hagmann and Hagmann.com. We're posting the link to the new video, I should say. You've got to take a look at that. We were getting into it prior to tonight's program. Fantastic. Folks, you're listening to a very special Friday edition.
To hour number 3 of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on this Friday, August 22nd, 2014, with our guest, Timothy Alberino. We were talking about a lot of things, covering some ground about his past in Peru to what we see happening in the world today. Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you continue on what you were talking about, and then we can get into some questions from the listeners at any time you like. So just go ahead and just cue us when you want some questions.
Okay. Yeah, I was just talking about how influential Genesis 6 Giants, the book, was in my life. And I remember listening. There's a particular broadcast that Steve was on. Steve was on Coast to Coast, and I'm sure he's been on Coast to Coast a number of times, specifically talking about his book, Genesis 6 Giants. But there was one that I probably listened to it a dozen times because I just wanted to get the reality downloaded into my spirit. I just wanted the tangible reality before my eyes all the time about the things that he was talking about, referring to the reality of giants that existed on the earth and of the genetic corruption that happened in the pre-flood world, and just that whole scenario. And as I always say, and as people always say, it really is the Rosetta Stone to understanding so much of what's happening now. And then I would also say, as a follow-up to Genesis 6 Giants, True Legends is just picks it up from where Genesis 6 Giants leaves off, and tells you a lot of the stories about the Native Americans. I just did a couple, not just, but a month ago, I completed a few episodes on the red-haired giants of North America, and there is just so much astounding information, evidence to the existence of a giant race. In some cases, we're talking about guys 18 feet tall that walked the landscape of this nation where we're now driving our automobiles and walking through malls. There were once 18-foot giants in some areas walking around. I mean, if that doesn't just absolutely blow your mind, then frankly, you're asleep. And so that's and True Legends really was a confirmation for me, because it focuses on a lot of the legends of the Native Americans concerning not only giants but what's called skinwalkers. And let me talk about those skinwalkers for a minute. This is why the True Legends resonated with me so much, is because this idea of skinwalkers, I was already very familiar with this, and so are the residents of a lot of these third world countries, because skinwalkers is what they refer to, not only to specific entities that change their shapes, because there are certain entities that aren't human that morph into different shapes, but the shamans, some of the shamans that we were talking about earlier, actually possess the capability to do this. And I don't know how. I don't understand the physics. I'm just telling you, they would do this, and they would walk around as cats, and they would walk around as, there was only a handful of animals, by the way, which they could turn themselves into, and it was by the power of these non-human entities that were instructing them and empowering them. And I don't know if it was in a state of astral projection where they could take on certain forms. I would be inclined to think that was probably what was going on. They were astral projecting out of their bodies and assuming the forms of other creatures. But in the neighborhood in which I lived, it was so prevalent, and I'm referring to that neighborhood again down in Talkewassee. It was so prevalent that there were actually a couple of cats that would be seen every now and again. The people would gasp and point at it, and they would say, "That's so-and-so," referring to a certain shaman. Of course, people can write that off as superstition, but let me tell you something. If you've encountered the things I've encountered, and I'm talking about non-human entities, I'm talking about me personally, have encountered and spoken with and not under the influence of any drugs or anything like that, but have been confrontational situations. It's not a matter that you take lightly, that you roll your eyes about. It is deadly, deadly, deadly serious. And so, anyways, Genesis 6 Giants and True Legends really breaks this stuff down and gives you so much information. I love the story, for example, in Genesis 6 Giants of the Romans' encounters with the giants. I never knew. We learned so much about the Romans in school, but they forgot to mention. I'll give them well, I could say a lot worse than that, concerning the fact that the Romans and Caesar himself documented and recounted their battles. I mean, entire battles where they were fighting these giants that were 15 feet tall. And the Romans were small, and people say, well, it's because the Romans were small. A 6-foot person is a giant to a Roman. No, they were describing guys, describing them with great detail that were 15 and 16 feet tall, that they were fighting, and Steve points out in his book that's where the term cutting them down at the knees came from, because that's pretty much all that they could do was swing at the kneecaps, which it really just completely repaints history. Just to imagine the legions of Rome marching against companies of 15-foot giants. I mean, that's the kind of history I could have gotten into in school.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and interesting how these phrases, the origins of the phrases. Wow. Go ahead, sir. Continue, please. You're on a roll.
I mentioned those books because they're really influential and they're very relevant to what we've been talking about here. So if there's some questions, I can field some questions.
Well, yeah, there are quite a few questions. There's reports of shamanism in, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, in New Mexico. Sarah writes, and no last names here, everything your speaker is discussing so far tonight strikes a chord with me, too. I live in northern New Mexico near Santa Fe, and shamanism is huge in that area, as is New Age mysticism, Roman Catholic mysticism, and so on. And she writes that her community's got a local family who frequently hosts a Native American church, a peyote church, complete with all-night drumming to call in spirits. Tim, is this am I missing this? I mean, have I lived a sheltered life, or is this kind of like an underground thing going on here?
Oh, it's an underground thing in the United States. They don't hide it, for example, in Peru. They don't hide it. They celebrate it. They celebrate the fact that their shamans are influential in society. Everybody knows where they live. They advertise their business, But over here in the United States, what we have is a more subtle form of sorcery, and it's called it's in the form of psychics, and it's in the form of astrology. Everywhere you go, in every town in this country, practically, you're going to find a psychic, and people take that lightly. They say, "Oh, the psychic." They, look at the idiot going in there thinking that he's going to get his palm read and it's going to give him any relevant information in his life. But it's not about how relevant it is. It really isn't about how accurate it is. Understand that every psychic every psychic shop, or whatever they're called, is a doorway, is a place of entry. You walk in there alone, you come out with company, if you know what I'm talking about. And let me say this will throw people for a loop. One of the revelations that I've had in my life, a powerful revelation concerning psychics, is I've done a lot of studying into alien abductions and the whole UFO phenomenon, the whole alien question, and you'll find if in anybody who's a student of ufology, particularly abduction, you'll find that almost all, I would be so bold as to say all of the victims or experiencers, as they like to call themselves, of alien abduction have some connection to the occult somewhere in either their life or their family tree. There's some connection to the occult. And many people don't start having abduction experiences until they go visit a psychic. And they go and they visit the psychic to get a simple reading. It seems so innocuous. It seems like such a harmless thing. It's so ingrained into our culture. Now, this is, again, going back to Pember's book, he really addresses this. This is what the analysis that should be done by Monday morning is going to be talking about, the final analysis on Earth's earliest ages. They go in thinking this is such a harmless thing to go sit before a psychic and get your palm read. After all, you're not sacrificing anything. You're not drinking blood. You're not performing the ritual yourself. Let me tell you something. If you study abductions, you're going to find that a lot of people were opened up to abduction because they went and had a reading by a psychic. And that's something that's glossed over obviously by most of the investigators in ufology, in the UFO community, because they don't understand it. That's what I'm telling people tonight. If you understand the dynamics, the spiritual dynamics at work, you can understand why that seemingly innocuous event is a gateway to causing you to become a candidate for abduction. And I look at the psychic shops, or whatever you call them, very differently now. Before, I can honestly tell you that they were just a joke to me, and I thought, you have to be an idiot to go in there and pay those people money. But I realized it's not about their ability. It's about something more insidious that they're not even in control of. They're being used. They're being used because there is a supernatural gateway open in that place. And now that when I look around and I see these psychic shops, and I had one right down the street from me when I lived in Cleveland, what I see are, how can I say this? It's like the place you go to sign up to be an abductee. That's the way I look. It's like
wow.
It's like the abductee registry to me, and it really, really is to a large degree. That really is the case. So many people, their abduction scenarios started to happen right after they went and had a reading from a psychic. Yes.
Are you saying then perhaps the abduction phenomena that we hear about on Coast to Coast and other programs like that is demonic in nature as opposed to maybe something else?
Well, this is a loaded subject worthy of a whole 3 hours by itself. But the alien agenda, I'll just say this: the alien agenda, the UFO stuff, the abduction stuff, it's not just spiritual. It is tangible. It is physical. It is take out your pistol and shoot the thing in the head and it drops dead in front of you. It is a mixture, an amalgamation of a lot of confusing things. But understand that it is demonic in origin. It is insidious, absolutely. It is controlled by the devil with an agenda, absolutely. But to say that it's just a supernatural phenomenon is not accurate. It's only partly accurate, because anybody knows the story of Phil Schneider, for example. You can look him up online. Phil Schneider, who took out a pistol and shot one of these entities in the head, killed a couple of them, actually. They dropped dead, stone cold dead. These are not ethereal entities in many cases. In some cases they are. In many cases they're not. We're dealing with creatures, entities that are possibly, and this is a conjecture, possibly from a pre-Adamic age, possibly from an antediluvian age. I don't know the answer to exactly what their origin is, but I can tell you this: they are not just wraith, ethereal entities pretending to be UFOs or whatever. Much of the craft that we see flying around, if it were to land in your front yard, you could take a rock and throw it at it and it would bounce off just like any other material, metallic material that we know of. So it is a misconception to blanket the UFO phenomenon with the word Nephilim for one thing, and with the word demonic for another. Although both of those words play into the situation, neither of those words give you the full picture, the full understanding, the full comprehension of what's actually happening. Because what we're dealing with is genetics, we're dealing with reverse engineered technology, we're dealing with nuts and bolts hardware. We're actually using, you and I are right now actually using, or let me put it this way, most probably are using technology that was derived from reverse engineering their technology. And, of course, that's a loaded statement, and people can believe it if they want, but I'm telling you it's true. And so that's just a quick snippet. It is imperative for people to understand that let's just call it and I think the term alien, by the way, when I use the term alien, because this is of huge interest to me, this subject. When I use the term alien, I'm not necessarily just referring to entities that come from some distant planet. I use the term alien because it is the most appropriate term you could possibly use to describe some of these entities. They are alien to anything that we know. They are alien to us personally as human beings. They're alien. In some cases, they're probably hybrid or something else. But so that's just to define that term, because I do use it a lot.
Interesting. I do have a question here. Joe's got several, but one question here from a listener listening out of Brisbane wants to know if perhaps some of our world leaders are otherworldly. His words, not mine. Or maybe to put it differently, to state the question differently, could some of our world leaders or people of influence have gotten there through demonic means or through supernatural means or whatever, or could they very well be the very entities that you speak of?
At this point in time, the question isn't which one of them are. The question is which one of them aren't. There are so many things going on right now. There are so many dynamics that are being added into the equation right now on a level on a level that is only comparable with the days of Noah, with the antediluvian world and the incursion of the Watchers into human affairs and into the human genome. And so, yes, let's just break it down to its simplest form, I'll call it. Let's take something that everybody knows about and probably everybody listening to this show can reference. Let's talk about Skull and Bones. And Skull and Bones, I forget, is that Princeton or is that Harvard?
Yale, I believe.
Or Yale. Okay, it was the other one. Well, the other two have their own societies too. They confuse me. They're all branches of the Illuminati. But Skull and Bones at Yale, they do these ceremonies that have become somewhat popular in our culture. A lot of people know about Skull and Bones and the different the various workings that they do. But they do these ceremonies in their facility that people may look at that and they may say, well, that's just a bunch of young guys who probably just drink too much and party too much and are these spoiled brats of rich kids who have everything given to them in their lives. And yeah, sure, that's true. But this is what people need to understand. Their attitude towards it and their clumsy working of the rites and the rituals, Aleister Crowley would probably not be very impressed with them. But understand that it's not the way they do it. It's who they're making contact with when they do it that matters. And so it is a matter of fact that all of these secret societies, the different ones, and I can't think of the names off the top of my head, but the one that's at Princeton, the one that's at Harvard, and Skull and Bones at Yale, they all perform these very grotesque, disgusting, base rituals, whether it be reenacting the sacrifice, some kind of a sacrifice, or what do you call that? Sacrificing in eulogy, I think it's called.
Effigy, yeah.
An effigy. I'm sorry, an effigy. whether they're doing these sacrifices in effigy, whether they're drinking blood, whatever they're doing. There's some accounts where they lay naked in coffins with dead people. Understand that what this is it's Luciferian programming. It's Luciferian programming. It's meant to infuse their lives with demonic spirits. And those demonic spirits that come, those demonic spirits that empower these men, do not leave on their own accord. The only way that, let's just name somebody, John Kerry, for example, who we know is Skull and Bones, along with George Bush Jr., those demonic entities that come as a result to the occultic practices, they may be playing. I don't care if they're playing. I don't care if they think they're these great sorcerers, but they're really just drunk. It doesn't matter what level they're doing this at. The point is it's real, and they're not in control. It's not about what they're doing. It's about what the entities behind the scenes are doing, using what they're doing as the gateway to come and influence. And they come and they'll inhabit these men, or certain entities will attach themselves to these men. And listen to me. Everybody listen to me. I don't care if these men say they're believers in Jesus Christ, or they have relationships with Jesus, or they go to church, or they're evangelical. My question is, have you shut the door and have those entities been expulsed from your life since you invited them in willingly during your time in those secret societies? And have you renounced those secret societies? Because if the answer is no, and it is no in John Kerry's case, and it is no in George Bush's case, George Bush Jr., and probably his father too, it is no, because they would have, that's not something you hide under a basket. That's something you come out with because you've been freed by the power and anointing of the Holy Spirit, and you declare that it's part of your testimony. And obviously that's not part of their testimony. So understand that because that's not part of their testimony, those entities are still part of their life, of their lives. And those entities are strategically chosen, and they're strategically sent to the different men depending on what they're going to be doing, what their future entails. So they are empowered. This is something that Russ Dizdar always talks about. This is Luciferian programming. They're empowered. Sometimes you'll find that these guys are multiples. Many of them, they're multiples. They have multiple personalities. They have what do you call them? Their personalities are divided into sections or compartmentalized. I forget the terminology that Russ Dizdar uses, but their part of them is perhaps the presidential guy, but then the other part of their personality is maybe childlike, maybe very. For example, there's a video, and I know I'm getting long-winded. I'll wrap this up. There's a video out there on Bill Clinton on YouTube where they're prepping him. They're adjusting his makeup or whatever and his microphone. I don't know if you guys have seen this, Doug and Joe, but they're prepping him for an interview, and I think it's under the heading of Mind Control or MK Ultra or something like that, which is real, by the way. But they're prepping Bill Clinton for this interview, and you look at Bill Clinton, and he's responding to the people around him. He looks in his face. He looks like he's acting like a juvenile. He is a juvenile. The word is alters. That's what the word that Russ Dizdar uses, and also that the Illuminati programmers who have defected, such as a woman named Spali, who you can find on the internet. Listen to her testimony. It will give you insight into Illuminati programming. So he was behaving. His altar. This altar was coming to the forefront in Bill Clinton when they're prepping him for this interview, and it was a very childlike, a juvenile personality, and he's just kind of looking around like as if he was high. And it's more than being high. It's a completely different persona. And so who knows what they did to activate him into presidential mode, but he wasn't in that mode when the cameras went on. Something changed. And find that video on YouTube and watch it. I think it's MK Ultra, Mind Control, Bill Clinton, something like that. But watch it, and you'll see firsthand what, for example, Russ Dizdar talks about with the alters and the multiple personalities. He's in an altered state of mind, and that's what happens. That they break you down. That's why you lay naked with a dead body. That's why you drink blood. That's why you're subjected to human sacrifice. It's part of the reason. Part of the reason is to infuse demons into your life and other spirits and entities. And the other part of the reason is to create these altars through trauma in your subconscious. And that's what they do. They create, through trauma, they create altars into your subconscious that they can call up. This is Illuminati Programming 101. This is something that, what's his name, who wrote the book, Bloodlines of the Illuminati.
Fritz Springmeier.
What's his name?
Springmeier, Fritz Springmeier.
Fritz Springmeier, I wanted to do him justice. Fritz Springmeier writes about this and talks about it extensively. And by the way, all of their stories corroborate the information that Russ Dizdar is getting from the satanic level, from the covens, the information that some of the Illuminati defectors are giving, such as this woman's folly, and the information that Fritz Springmeier writes about. It all corroborates. It fits together perfectly like a jigsaw puzzle. Why? Because it's true. And as an addendum to what I just said, they also subject these men of power to these embarrassing, compromising situations on the most base form to blackmail them if need be. And to
wow.
I think, is that the right term, blackmail, or is it?
Why not? It's one of many terms, blackmail indeed. Control, blackmail, however you want to say it. Just real quick, I'm looking, and I've done a lot of research about these various cults, including but not limited to Subud, for example. Mr. Alberino, are you familiar with the cult Subud, S-U-B-U-D?
No, I never heard of that.
Okay, all right. That's fine. I just, it's really an obscure, quasi-religious, quasi-political, quasi-social small club that had its roots, or has its roots from Indonesia, and of course Obama and others, including Loretta Fuddy, who was killed in a plane crash, ostensibly killed in a plane crash, was part of. But having said all of that, looking at Barack Hussein Obama from an investigative point of view, I'm looking at this guy, and quite frankly, I don't know who his father is. That's debatable. I'm not even sure we know who his actual paternal mother, biological mother is, or paternal, biological mother. Would he be somebody that you would look at and say, wait a minute, there's something seriously wrong here in terms of, well, how you describe the various personalities?
I think Barack Obama is probably the best example of what I'm talking about, because the guy is so aloof right now in his presidency. People think it's because he doesn't care or whatever. No, it's because he's not in control, for one thing. He's just, it's the puppet masters. They raise the string on his right arm, and his right arm goes up. They raise the string on his left arm, and his left arm goes up. He's just glibly gliding through the rest of his presidency, playing out the role he was chosen to perform, which is to be a submissive puppet. And there's no question whatsoever. When you've got darkness in somebody's past, when you've got a nebulous situation, when somebody doesn't come to the forefront and is forthwith with the details of their past, it's because they're hiding something dark and sinister, period. And the man is hiding dark and sinister things. Obama is under very heavy demonic control. I can't tell you, Doug, if it's something to do with the fact that he has an altar, that he's been subjected to Luciferian programming. I can't tell you if, and I'm gonna throw a real curveball at everybody right now, but I'll say it confidently. I can't tell you if the man's even fully human, or I can't tell you that he's not a clone. Let's put it that way. I don't know, and of course people will take issue with that.
Yeah, don't laugh that off and say, "Oh, come on," But you've got, and there's plenty of evidence, not anecdotal, but evidence of things like this taking place. Body doubles. Such. Yeah. There
is a. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day. There is an overwhelming amount of evidence. It's not that the evidence isn't there; it's that people just simply refuse to look at it, or pay attention to it, and because it's not reported in mainstream news, they don't believe that it's real. It's only real if Fox News tells you, or it's only real if your pastor brings it up. And in many cases, the situation couldn't be further from the truth.
That's right. Hey, Tim, if you don't mind, one of our guests and friends of the show, Brother Marcus, he's on the line. He wants to ask you a question, and he's very familiar in dealing with dark spiritual entities, casting them out, and it lives in an Indian reservation, and he helps the people there deal with these dark entities and rids them from the community. Brother Marcus, are you there?
Yes, Brother Joe. Greetings, Brother Joe and Brother Doug. You always have a tremendous, but tonight is a monumental show, I believe, in your history. And I want to thank you so much for having this guest on. This is the first opportunity that I've had to listen to this man. And I want to extend an open invitation to my brother right now, if he would be willing at some point to be a guest on our radio show, Pine Ridge Warriors. My brother, as Brother Joe said, myself and my son, we deal with a lot of the same things here on this native reservation that you've had the experience in yourself. And so this show is just resonating in my spirit. I mean, I am so glad that I've had the opportunity to listen in tonight to this broadcast. You're a tremendous, speaker, but you have the experience to back that up. And again, thank you for, this time that you've had on Doug and Joel's show. This has been tremendous, and I would encourage listeners to go back and listen to it time and time and time again. You shared so much. And again, that opportunity is there for you, my brother. And I would just like to just ask real quick if it would be possible if we at some point could share with you some of the experiences that we've had here on this reservation dealing with, shapeshifters and just elusive spirits and also other types of just uncanny things that happen here.
Well, first of all, I want to convey to you that I really appreciate and respect your scenario, your situation over there on the reservation. I've heard of you, and I've heard you on the radio, and you are highly regarded in my mind, and I absolutely accept your invitation. And I know I was going to make the comment earlier that if you want to see some of the stuff I'm talking about, go to the Indian reservations, because that's where it's happening in broad daylight within the shores of this country. I would be absolutely thrilled if you would share with me your experiences over there, because I guarantee you have a lot more experience than I do in many areas. I think that although there's a lot of similarities, I think that just because of the fact that these entities are different depending on where you are in the world, they're similar in the fact that they're all demonic, they're all working for the same team, but they have different personalities, they have different domains, and it would be very interesting to cross-reference our experiences. And so I appreciate you calling in. By the way, my email address is timothyelbarino@hotmail.com for anybody who would be interested in getting in contact with me.
All right. Well, thank you, my brother, and I look forward to getting in contact with you.
And I'll make sure I get that information to you, Brother Marcus. His contact info, and I'll do the same with you, Tim.
Okay.
I'll make this quick, but we just recently come into contact with some people who have elders that have lived and some still live that have firsthand knowledge of everything from, experiences with UFO, demonic entities, shape-shifting and everything. So I'm going to be looking into that. Me and Kurt's going to be trying to, validate and verify some of those things. So I look forward to sharing that with our brother, your special guest tonight. So enough of your time tonight. Thank you so much, Doug and Joe, for having this man of God on. My brother, look forward to being in touch with you, and I'll get all your contact information from Brother Joe, and we'll look forward to having you on in the very, very, very near future.
Absolutely. Thank you for calling in.
Thanks, Brother Marcus.
God bless you, brother. God bless you, Joe. God bless you, Doug.
God bless you, too. Take care. Yeah, this is a subject that is not for the faint of heart, and as you said, some people would laugh off some of the things you talk about, or just think in their mind dismissive because it seems so out there. But I've talked with many people who've had experiences, as you mentioned, about the astral projection or shape shifting. I know people who swear that they know what they've experienced, and I trust them. I know it's no joking matter, but and this is something as we're approaching the end times that we will deal with not shapeshifters, but we will see these things. They'll be part of our what do they call it? The dimensions. It will form our spirit. The spiritual dimension and the human dimension are merging as the time of the end approaches. And this is going to be something, whether you think it's real or not, it's going to be in your face sooner than later.
That's right, and there's a movement right now, which we didn't have time to talk about tonight. Joe, you and I were talking about it earlier, which I think we should do a whole show on it because there's a lot to be said. There's a movement right now that, again, I go back to Pember in his book Earth's Earliest Ages, which, by the way, you can get at RaidersNewsUpdate.com on Tom Horn's website. But there is a movement that is trying to break down the barriers, purposely trying to break down the barriers, the inhibitors, if you will, that separate us from having direct contact at all times with these supernatural entities and with these other creatures. And Pember recognizes the beginning of it. He identifies the beginning of it in the latter part of the 19th century. And what he identifies, and we've covered a little bit of it before on the show, is magnifying. It began in his days, but it's magnifying and maturing in ours. So understand that there is a purposeful, there is an operation, and it is a very strategic operation to break down the barriers that you're mentioning, Joe. And actually, in Steve's book Xenogenesis, he mentions the some of that in context of the rainbow. And if you hadn't read that chapter in Xenogenesis, you need to go get Xenogenesis and read the chapter about the revelations concerning the rainbow and what they're doing to try and let's just call it geoform or terraform the earth and the environment so that it can be more conducive, comfortable for the entities that were afoot during the antediluvian days. So it's very real, and it's happening, and it's happening on a broad scale. And let me say, before I forget, let me just tell you a real quick story that gives you an idea of how some of this stuff operates. When I was younger, before I went to Peru, I was probably, I'd say I was 17 years old, maybe 18 years old. I met a couple of friends of mine at a restaurant. They're both believers. I met a couple of friends of mine at a restaurant. By the way, folks, let me repeat something so that nobody gets any ideas. I've never taken a drug in my life. I've never smoked marijuana. Never. Okay? So don't just write this off as, oh, he was probably smoking marijuana. I've never touched it. I'm not saying that to toot my own horn. I'm saying it to verify what I'm about to tell you. So at least you can count that out if that's a criticism in your mind. So I met my friends at the restaurant, and we're at a corner table. I'll try and get through this really quickly. We're sitting at a corner table in a diner at nighttime, probably sometime around 11:30 at night, sitting in the corner. I'm sitting facing the window, looking out of the building, and my friend sitting in front of me, and my other friend sitting to my left. It's one of those curved corner tables, the U-shaped tables. And these two individuals walked into the restaurant, and there weren't many people in this restaurant. We might have been the only ones, actually, now that I think about it, just us and these other two individuals walked into the restaurant. They were dressed in black. They walk in, they walk by me, and as they walked by me, I felt something very strange. In fact, we all did at the table. We looked over at them. There was something very strange about these people. They were very normal-looking people, by all accounts. I mean, they looked human. Everything was normal about them. They were smiling and chatting away, actually. And they sat at the table that was in front of me to the right. So it was at an angle to me, to my right hand. So, in other words, one person's head, I'm basically seeing the back portion of that person's head, and then I see the front portion of the other person sitting in front of them. I hope I'm describing this adequately. And so I'm talking to my friends, and I had an experience in my life when I was younger, in which I heard the audible voice of God. And so I'm relating this experience to these friends of mine, and I'm telling them about this amazing experience I had with the Lord, and I happened to glance over at this table, and I'm telling you, listen, I'm fully awake, fully aware of my surroundings, absolutely in my right mind. I glance over at this table, this little table, and let me tell you what I saw. I didn't see this in the spirit. I didn't have a vision. I saw this. It was tangible. It was physical. It was there in every sense of the word before my eyes. These two individuals were no longer talking, but staring at me. And what was interesting was, the first thing that was interesting and extremely shocking was that the first individual whose back was to me, he was faced forward still in the direction of the person sitting in front of him, but his head was completely turned around on his shoulders and looking at me like the exorcist. And I've never seen anything like this in my life. Looking at me, and their faces were not human. Their faces were, for lack of a better term, demonic. Black eyes. These were physical people, apparently people, but they weren't really people. And the one was just looking at me with its head, and then the other one sitting in front of this individual was staring at me, just this dead gaze staring at me. This was a woman, this one, and she looked the same as him, except for her head was not turned around on her shoulders. And I literally looked at them. I probably met their gaze for 5 to 10 solid seconds, absolutely frozen in my seat. My heart dropped into my gut, as you can imagine. And I slowly looked to my friends, and I was pale, and they said, "What's wrong?" I said, "Well, I'm going to tell you, but you're probably not going to believe me." And I told them, and then I looked back, glanced back, and of course there they are, just chatting like normal people. I say that to say this. The Bible talks about, in the New Testament, there's a reference made to go out and invite, the strangers who are in your town. That was something that Jesus taught, was if there's a stranger in your town, you go out and invite them. You be hospitable to them. Invite them in just like Lot in Sodom or Gomorrah. I can't remember exactly which city it was in Sodom. And this was the explanation of why believers should be anxious to do this, because the writer said in the New Testament, because you do not know whether or not you're entertaining an angel. You might, in other words, go invite that person in your home, show them hospitality. That person might be an angel. You might be unknowingly showing hospitality to an angel, and we can assume that there would be some blessings or some kind of beneficial, something beneficial as a result of that. That's the context that the apostle was explaining this. And so we have to infer that the very same thing can happen on the other side of the field, that you could be actually speaking with somebody that's not human at all, that is a fallen angel. In fact, that does happen to be a fact, and that does happen. As hard as that is for people to swallow, as hard a pill as that is for people to swallow, it is the truth. You could be looking face to face with somebody that has all the indications of humanity, and they can be anything but human. And by the way, that doesn't just go for fallen angels. There are a myriad of options that person could be. And I'm just going to throw that out there for any inquisitive minds. Delve into that, what I just said. There are a myriad of options that could be, demonic options. And because there's so much happening on this planet, that it just, I always make the statement that the rabbit hole isn't a gentle decline. It is an absolute dead drop in a bottomless hole, if you know what I mean, Doug and Joe. I mean, it's just an acceleration, and once you start uncovering this, and it leads to this, and it leads to that, and it's all being corroborated in the Bible, I'm telling you, you cannot look at the world the same. It's impossible. Your paradigm is forever changed at that point.
So am I correct to understand that as time marches forward, as we reach the end of days, that the veil between, and I'm not even sure if this is the right or proper terminology, but the veil between dimensions, we'll say, will be ripped further, shredded. In other words, there'll be overlap of dimensions, and we'll see more of this. Or
I know people are probably sick of me referencing Earth's earliest ages, but I have to do it again, Doug. Pember, you said it perfectly, and Pember actually explains how it's happening, and he uses the scriptures to show humanity collectively is being guided right now to do certain things. Let me say one thing, abortion. Abortion isn't just some whimsical, liberal, progressive ideology. Abortion is strategic. The letting of blood on a mass scale. What are we up to, 53 million babies aborted? That is occultic. So there's things that the human race are being led to do. We're being led to do by the secret societies like the Illuminati, by the occult in general, and obviously by the puppet master all the way up at the top. And so we're being led to engage in certain things. Case in point, this may seem like what's the term? An innocuous example, but I'm going to use it because I was very irritated by it, and I am to this day, and my friends are probably laughing because they probably know what I'm going to refer to, and that is the Harlem Shake. And a lot of you are probably familiar with this idiotic Harlem Shake phenomenon that's going on YouTube. I don't know if it's still going on or if it's lost legs, but let's say a year ago, this Harlem Shake where and I'm sure 100 people are going to Google it right now, but where you have in a seemingly organized, ordered environment, some idiot suddenly stands up or walks in or jumps up on the table, almost always with a helmet on, and starts to just dance and gyrate is the best term in the most absurd ways. And there's this music playing, very heavy, I would say demonically charged music playing in the background. And it begins with the phrase, con lo terrorista. It begins with the phrase in Spanish, with the terrorist. And this person comes on the scene and begins to dance around, like I said, in the midst of a very quiet or ordered setting, such as a church. And then all of a sudden the music changes. You hear a deep voice pronounce, now do the Harlem Shake. And it's a very demonic, deep voice in every scenario. And then all of a sudden the scene changes. You know, they edit the video, and they're obviously doing this. They're coordinating this. All of a sudden the music changes, and everybody's going ape. You know what? Everybody's going nutso, and everybody's gyrating. And it's like they think of the most absurd, the most nonsensical movement position that they can put themselves in, and then they begin to gyrate and wiggle and dance, and it's just chaos, and it's idiotic, but it's more. It's very, very demonic. And stuff like that can be just laughed at and brushed to the side. But for anyone who's got discernment, that comes, by the way, from pagan rituals, in which, and this is what happens. This is in Buddhism. I mean, not Buddhism. I want to say Voodooism. And you find this in voodoo magic, and you'll find this in other cultures where the principal person, the shaman, for example, will stand up in the middle, usually around a fire or something. There'll be the patrons of this ritual will be in a circle, very similar to the ayahuasca scenario. And the person in the middle who's leading this will suddenly be overtaken by demons. And this is what happens. This is literally what happens. They're overtaken by demonic spirits, and they begin to gyrate uncontrollably. Of course, they're celebrating this. They begin to gyrate uncontrollably. They get thrown into a demonic fit. And then suddenly, the people who are in unison around the circle, they also get demonically possessed. And it's a big demonic orgy of possession, and everybody's gyrating, and it's a ritualistic, occult, a demonizing, purposely so event. That is being played out now of course, with the difference between the stupid young people in the United States doing this, participating in this, many of which are youth groups, churches. I've even seen big, humongous ministries that I'm not going to mention on air, whose young people are engaged in this. All kinds from across the spectrum, people are doing this because it's cool. And what's happening is they think they're doing something stupid, something nonsensical, something that really doesn't have any consequence. But what they're doing is they're actually slowly beginning to do two things. They're beginning to open gates that they don't understand, and they're beginning to bring into the consciousness of the culture this demonic, this occultic let's call it subterranean culture that's been hiding all this time. They're slowly working it into the general consciousness. And so that's an example of something that seems, again, innocuous, but really it's not. And shame on those Christians who are participating in it, and shame on those pastors and youth leaders who are allowing their young people to do this. I don't know if it's still going on, but it was a big phenomenon. That shows you the ignorance that exists, the rank ignorance that exists among fellowships of people who call themselves believers. They will reject Genesis 6. They will reject the notion of the kind of demonic stuff we're talking about, or aliens or clones or whatever, but yet then they'll go and engage in that kind of tomfoolery, for a lack of a better word, and to not use profanity. I mean, that's it just absolutely enrages me. That is what's happening. That's the way it just surreptitiously works its way into the collective consciousness of the people. And of course, people can think of many more examples. Lots of music videos out there. Everybody doing the New World Order triangle symbol with their hands, the eye, the all-seeing eye. Everybody says, oh, that's just dumb. That's just foolishness. They just want attention. Yes, they do. They are stupid. It's the height of stupidity. But the entities that are guiding this are not stupid. They're slowly opening a gateway, and it's happening right now. So as a long explanation, Doug, you're absolutely right. The veil is thin, is becoming thinner, and it's because of us. It's because of human activity that is thinning that veil.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for answering that question. I've got so many questions here. I've lost track. I'll try to fit one more in here. Katie, from listening live from Salem, Massachusetts, actually, wants to know. She's heard Nathan Leal talk about things like the Super Bowl and also the Olympics, the Illuminati symbolism take place there, as if they are attempting to convey a message to warn us or to talk amongst themselves. Is this part and parcel to what you're referring to? Okay, all right, kind of the root of everything, right?
That's not Katy Perry calling in to excoriate me, is it?
No.
She's certainly at the one of the primary people who are introducing this occult symbolism into our culture, and to our young girls, no less. But anyways, yes, the answer is yes. They're communicating to each other. They're communicating to each other, for one thing. For another thing, there's a principle. They call it the Luciferian rule, or a principle. They give it different names. And even people who don't believe in the Bible, or even atheists and agnostics, will tell you that there appears to be a Luciferian rule by which they all abide. They have to tell you what they're doing to you before they do it. Well, it's not, in my opinion, it's not a Luciferian rule. I believe God constrains them that they have to do that. Why? Because God will not allow our free will to be taken from us. We have to choose. We have to decide. We have to allow this stuff to happen. And so it's our choice. It's our authority. Again, we are the gatekeepers. We are the holders of the key. And we allow this stuff to permeate. And so they tell us what they're doing because they have to. It's my opinion. Other people can argue a different point, but it's my opinion that is not a Luciferian principle, but that is a principle laid out by God Almighty. The devil has to tell us. We have to be willful participants. And we are, by the way. Our world is, especially our country, we absolutely are becoming willful participants. I mean, 53 million aborted babies says it all.
Yeah, absolutely. 90 seconds left, Mr. Alberino. Folks, you've been listening to Timothy Alberino, the Alberino analysis, linked off of Hagmann and Hagmann.com. Final thoughts, sir.
Well, I would just say that I will be coming out with a book pretty soon. It's called The Blue Book. It expounds on the situation that happened to me in the jungle. It relates to everything we're talking about tonight, and I think many people will get a download of revelation from what's revealed in the experience that I had in the Amazon. So that will be coming out at some point in time.
I can't wait, and certainly we'd like to have you back on any time and as many times as you can. This is fascinating stuff, and this is really the crux, the meat of the matter. Mr. Alberino, thank you so much for your time tonight. I just can't thank you enough for all of the information which you've imparted.
Yeah.
My
awesome
goodness.
Show.
Absolutely. Sir,
thank you, gentlemen.
God bless you, my friend. Thank you so very much for your gift of time, and we will talk again.
Yes, we will.
All right, sir.
Thank you.
Folks, that'll do it for tonight. Doug Hagmann, Joe Hagmann together. We will be back tomorrow night for the weekend report. Stay or definitely check back with us tomorrow night, same time, 8 o'clock.